Vermin Supreme, a presidential candidate known for wearing a boot on his head and promising everyone a free pony if elected, was barred this week from participating in the New Hampshire Institute of Politics Lesser-Known Candidates Forum. The Concord Monitor reports that this comes after he sprinkled glitter on the head of a candidate whom he saw as racist at the same event 4 years ago. He waited outside the event Tuesday. It was 19 degrees. Inside, 5 lesser-known candidates for the 2016 Republican presidential nomination and 20 for the Democratic presidential nomination participated in the forum hosted by St. Anselm College. From Manchester, New Hampshire, this is 3 hours and 10 minutes.
Thank you to Neil and the St. Anselm College and the New Hampshire Institute of Politics. I also want to thank Secretary of State Bill Gardner and his terrific staff at the Secretary of State's office and the Elections Division for the opportunity to join in what is a great night. And to amplify on what Secretary Gardner said, I want to set the record straight tonight. This is not the happy hour. This is not the JV debate. This is not the undercard debate. This is a uniquely New Hampshire opportunity for all the candidates who have put themselves forward for the highest office in the land to speak to the people of New Hampshire and explain why they think they are the best candidate to be the President of the United States. This year, in the 2016 New Hampshire primary, we have 58 candidates on the ballot. That's the second most in a presidential primary in the state, the most since 1992. And so we'll have a chance tonight to hear from some of them, their views on the issues. And before I do that, though, I want to introduce the panel that will be helping me to ask questions of the candidates tonight. First, we have to my left, Brad Milkey is covering the New Hampshire primary for ABC News. It's the best job in politics, I think, as Neil alluded to, as I have experienced. Journalist for ABC News. He's also a reporter for ABC Radio, where he won a 2015 Edward R. Murrow Award. Next we have, absolutely. And next we have a familiar face to many here in the Granite State. That's John DeStaso. He is a 35-year Granite Stater who is a political reporter with WMUR since April of 2015. He also began his New Hampshire journalism career as a reporter for the Union Leader. All of us were avid readers of the Granite Status column that he wrote so well for so many years. And we know he'll bring a great taste and discerning to this evening as a fellow New Jerseyan and a Yankee fan, I should add.
Right.
Not a popular view in this
afraid.
Audience, perhaps, but...
Appreciate you're not afraid to say that. That's good. That's good.
And last but not least, I'll introduce Jim Splain. He's a former 30-year New Hampshire state representative and state senator. He's been involved in every single New Hampshire primary since 1960, and he is following in the great tradition of Stephen Bullock, the author of the primary law here in New Hampshire. Mr. Splain has helped guarantee New Hampshire's first in the nation status by writing the law that has guaranteed that the Secretary of State has at his discretion the ability to set the primary 7 days or more before any similar election. So thank you all for joining me tonight. And so tonight our plan is to go down the line. We'll ask each of the candidates questions. They'll have 1 minute to answer. Mr. Splain is the timekeeper tonight. He will let you know a yellow card when you have 30 seconds left and a red card when it's time to finish up. We will hope to get as many rounds of questions as we can. First, we're going to have some 2-minute opening statements from each of the candidates. Let's introduce them first. We have Stephen Cumley from Rowley, Massachusetts, Tim Cook from Brown Summit, North Carolina, Walter Ivachu from Sunnyside, New York, Andy Martin from here in Manchester, New Hampshire, and Joe Robinson from Boston, Massachusetts. These are the Republican lesser-known candidates tonight. Everyone, please give them a round of applause. And as I said, we'll begin with opening statements. And Mr. Cumley, you can begin.
Yes, and I want to recognize this college because, and I'm going to be interviewed by the student. She's the chief editor of the student paper, and that really impressed me because, you know, the power in this country is with the young people because it's not so much about our future, it's about theirs. And it's very important. I've been doing investigations in Washington, been a private investigator in Washington for over 30 years. And because of it, I've had threats on my life. And I had people come out and scared my wife and kids while I was in Washington. And a car was burning my yard and my farm in Raleigh, Mass. at 1 o'clock in the afternoon after my family left. And I'm not too happy about it. And I'm going to get some more threats when I bring all this information out. I want you to, it's very important, especially in the audience, because I'm not too pressed with the national media. But YouTube, I'm impressed with, because they aren't intimidated. I want you to remember this website, www.stephen, S-T-E-P-H-E-N, Comley, C-O-M as in Mary, L-E-Y, SR.com. And you're going to see YouTubes on there with Mr. Trump. I gave him evidence, and also Mr. Carson. They've had evidence for 140 days about unsafe conditions in nuclear plants across the country, including Seabrook. Now, I got involved because my family's in the nursing home profession. And I had a resident in my home that was paralyzed. And after getting national media attention, the Nuclear Regulatory Commission, the executive director, wrote to us and told me to leave the paralyzed resident behind in my son's nursing home now. He's run it for 22 years, 4th generation. Told me to leave the resident behind and give her iodine to drink to be administered by a volunteer willing to stay behind during an accident at Seabrook. And first responders, we've heard a lot about responders, police, getting assassinated for doing their job and whatnot. Well, right now, there's a gag order on the New Hampshire National Guard.
Okay, Mr. Comley, we're going to try and make sure we're as fair to all the candidates as we can tonight.
Okay.
Your 2 minutes is up.
And there's a gag order on the national.
We'll move down the line to
Massachusetts
Mr.
State
Cook.
Police.
Mr. Cook, you have your 2 minutes for opening statement.
So in order for us to
Mr.
correct
Comley?
things in Washington, you got to get involved. You got to do more than complain. Thank you.
Okay. My name is Tim Cook, and I'm running for president. So I'm after your vote and your wallet. And in case you're wondering, I use an Android. You know, I'm a fellow of the North Carolina Institute of Political Leadership, and I understand here it's all about politics. In fact, you have in the lobby, a book to make men free, History of the Republican Party. That's ironic, because they say America's the land of the free. Well, I'm here to tell you that's simply not true. In fact, it's a lie. No, our women aren't made to cover their faces. Our children aren't told who they can marry. Then why are we told who we can vote for president? The TV debates are based on poll numbers, but someone select who's included in the polls and what candidate is excluded in the polls. So someone is cherry picking the candidates for voters, and that's un-American. The president should be elected and not selected. It's a very good chance that Abraham Lincoln today wouldn't make the cut, and then where would we be? The Federal Election Commission and our Congress is letting this happen. It's all about money. If you have money to pay for your own private polls and hire a polling company, it's a pretty good bet that they're going to include you in the public polls. Also, some states themselves restrict ballot access to some candidates. Even if you've gotten 20 to 25% of votes in past statewide elections, you may be excluded from the state ballot, unless you're a millionaire. Even after the party has said in the news, all are welcome. All are welcome, I guess the Constitution only applies to some, not all. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Cook. Mr. Ivashu.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Walter Ivashu. I was born in Brooklyn, grew up in Queens, spent some time in Long Island, and came back to Queens. I traveled up to Wentworth a lot to go cross-country skiing, and I cherish the people of New Hampshire. They're independent. They're able to make their own decisions. This is the year that people are seriously looking at other candidates, the non-professional politician. I endorse that feeling that New Hampshire and Iowa have, and I ask for your vote for President of the United States.
Thank you, Mr. Ivashu. If I can say that right this time. Next up, Mr. Martin, Andy Martin.
Well, I want to thank the college for sponsoring this event, and I'd like to thank the audience for coming out on a brisk New Hampshire January evening. My name is Andy Martin, and I'm also celebrating a 100-year anniversary this year. In 1916, my mother's parents, my grandparents, immigrated to Manchester from Greece. And my mother and my uncle graduated from the University of New Hampshire. And my grandfather was a small businessman in what was then the sort of ethnic Greek neighborhood on Lake Avenue. As a boy in the 1950s, I caught the tail end of that immigrant experience. So while I'm a conservative when it comes to lawful immigration and fighting illegal immigration, I also have a tremendous sympathy for and a connection with the immigrant experience. I'm also a little unusual in that I'm the only candidate, better known or lesser known, who's actually lived overseas in China and 2003 in Iraq, knows the Arab world, has spoken the local languages, and has predicted with rather devastating understanding just what is going to happen and what is going to go wrong and what could go right. So today our politics, unfortunately, is not informed by experience or knowledge. We elected a man three elections ago who had never left the country except as a tourist, didn't know anything about the foreign world, created a disaster. I'm somebody who has been fighting corruption in the political system since I went to Capitol Hill 51 years ago, and I worked for Senator Paul Douglas, who was a corruption fighter and a guy who liked to stir what was then a vastly more corrupt bureaucracy than it is today. So I'm very proud to be here to present my qualifications, to participate in the primary, and to do honor to the great democracy which my grandparents enjoyed when they came here 100 years ago in 1916. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Martin. And last but not least, to Mr. Joe Robinson.
In watching the politicians and the wealthy on television, it's quite obvious that if any of them knows what our problems are, none of them has a clue how to solve them. I am the only candidate who knows how to solve our four major problems of unemployment, terrorism, immigration, and government debt. With my federal court credentials and expert on emissions chemistry, I can tell you that these problems can be easily solved once we rescind the EPA's regulations that are contrary to scientific knowledge, but were successful in destroying our economy and successful in financing terrorism. The present litigation between the EPA and Volkswagen proves that the EPA knows that natural gas emissions of nitric acid are the most polluting and that industrial oil emissions of sulfuric acid are the second worst, while coal emissions are in fact the cleanest of all the emissions. The EPA has been telling us the opposite over the last 45 years in order to favor the oil and gas interests which finance terrorism and in order to favor the Japanese car makers over our own car makers. Knowing that coal emissions are the cleanest, we should be opening up our coal sources in the 26 states that have coal in commercial quantities, and we should be using that coal not only to fuel our industrial boilers, but to manufacture gasoline from coal. We won't be the first. South Africa has been doing it since 1957. This development of coal will not only end unemployment among the legals, it will require us to convert the millions of welfare-collecting illegals into tax-paying legals. We will use profit-sharing plans to make sure that the quality of the work is good and middle-class wages. In this election, you'll either vote to continue the EPA's regulations, which bankrupt America, or you'll vote for me to create the middle-class employment that will restore America to its grandeur.
And thank you, Mr. Robinson. Now, once again, as far as the format tonight, we'll ask each of you questions one by one. You'll have 1 minute to respond. Again, Mr. Splain will remind you of how much time you have left. As a moderator, I'll reserve the right to ask some follow-up questions if I feel like there's an opportunity to do so. We also may ask all of you as a panel questions from time to time. So why don't we get the questions underway? We'll start with Brad.
Okay. Mr. Cook, since we last held this debate, this country has seen tens of thousands of gun deaths, including several mass shootings at schools. What needs to be done to prevent more of them?
Well, I'm a proponent of the Second Amendment. It's terrible to have school deaths. We need to maybe look at the violence on television, the violence in the video games, and also the mental health stuff. But as far as the Second Amendment, for the first 150 years the country was founded, there was basically no federal gun laws. In the last 40-some years has been the most of the federal gun laws have been putting on the book, and gradually it's eroding more and more of our rights. Now, I don't like seeing gun deaths of children, but also there's 6 million reasons in Europe that we shouldn't have gun laws. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Cook. The next question will be for Andy Martin from John DeStaso.
Mr. Martin, following up on that, when we have a terrorist incident, mass shooting of any kind in the United States, from Newtown to San Bernardino, again, the debate immediately turns at least from the White House, to the Second Amendment. What restrictions, are there any restrictions that you find sensible that have been suggested by the President that should be imposed on gun ownership or available weapons? And do you agree with the President's executive action to close so-called gun show loopholes?
To answer the gun show answer first, no. Actually, I agree with, of all people, Bernie Sanders. Bernie Sanders represents Vermont, and I'm actually doing a story about how Hillary Clinton shot herself in the foot by attacking him for gun control. And Bernie's argument in the debates that I've watched, I do slum occasionally and watch the Democratic debates, has been that we have to kind of sit down among ourselves as a country, both parties, we're very divided on this, Republicans and Democrats, and see if we can work out sensible accommodations. And the problem we have with President Obama is that it's impossible to know what makes sense and what doesn't, because whatever he says polarizes the nation. And so in his own way, Bernie Sanders is making sense when he says, look, I live in Vermont as a liberal socialist. He doesn't support gun restrictions of an extreme nature. I think more conversation and less hostility is called for. That would be my solution.
Thank you, Mr. Martin. Mr. Comley, I'll ask you the next question. In 2013, the Senate debated the Manchin-Toomey proposal that would have expanded background check requirements to all gun purchases, including those at gun shows. Senator Shaheen here in New Hampshire supported that. Senator Ayotte voted against it. What would have your vote been?
Well, I don't think you need a machine gun to kill a rabbit, for one thing, but I do respect people's right to have a gun. But you know what's wrong right now with the terrorists that's going on? You know, none of the press and none of the politicians are asking why so many people in other countries hate us. Now, I was out to Chattanooga when the Marines were killed, and I've had armed forces come to me. You know what they say? They said, Mr. Connell, we understand that you protect informants. We're going to give you some information that the American people should know about. But you can't give up our identities. And I said, of course not. If you let me, I will. If you don't, I'll be out of business. If I give up your name, I'm out of business. You know what they told me? They said, the Obama administration and past administrations in Bush have helped promote people to sign up for ISIS. And I said, why do you feel that way? All the bombs and chemical warfare that were given to the Iraq president, Saddam Hussein, were given to him by U.S. military companies.
Your minute is up, Mr. Comley. Thank you for your answer.
They were given to military companies.
Brad?
And that's why a lot of people in other countries hate us.
Brad, you'll ask the
And
next
we got to
question.
find out why they hate us.
Mr. Comley, thank
But
you.
until we do, we can't stop the terrorists. And they're going to come.
The next question will be to Mr. Evihu from Brad.
You mentioned New Hampshire's live free or die attitude. Should the role of government be smaller than it is today? And if so, how would you balance that with the needs of everyday Americans?
The role of government should be smaller. It should be smarter. Technology has to be used to make the people that we employ to protect us more efficient. There has to be smart technologies used to protect the people. I propose using smart weaponry to enhance the availability of weapons for legal ownership. The smart weapons would prevent people from accidentally shooting other people. There are other issues that we have to deal with. There's limited amounts of money, and these constant terror threats are draining away our resources. We have to somehow remove this constant drain from us. And we can't count on the police being there when something happens in the streets. We have to be able to protect ourselves. I was attacked by 7 men and 2 dogs. I didn't have a weapon. So these things have to be protected by the Second Amendment.
Thank you. John DeStaso will ask the next question to Mr. Robinson.
Mr. Robinson, I'm going to stay with that topic. As president, how would you protect our school children, or how would you propose protecting our school children and our college campuses in an effort to be sure there's no more Sandy Hooks or Umpqua community colleges in Oregon? Some say there should be restrictions on gun ownership. Others say there should be more guns. there should be allowed officers, armed officers, retired policemen in the schools?
It would take a much longer than 60 seconds to answer your question. I've given it a lot of thought. But believe it or not, one of my concepts would be to legalize Pirate Bay in this country. Now that seems like there's no connection. I don't know if you're familiar with Pirate Bay or not, but if you're familiar with Pirate Bay, what it allows people to do is to take down all types of computer programs and movies and videos and whatnot without paying for it. Now if you think about it, what is a person using a gun? Is the store that sold him a gun responsible? And the answer is, you have two things. What's the concept of an accessory to a crime? And by legalizing Pirate Bay, you take all these people in the movie business, you take all these people in the video business, and the computer programmers who like guns, and they'll see it from a much different point of view.
Thank you, Mr. Robinson. We're discussing the Second Amendment, one of the important rights that Americans hold dear. The next president will likely have an appointment to the Supreme Court who will hear cases involving the Second Amendment and others. Why don't we go down the line, and if each of you would name a Supreme Court justice, current or former, that you would consider a model of the kind of justice you would like to appoint if you have the opportunity to do so. Mr. Cumley, why don't you go first?
I'm sorry, I didn't quite hear the question. Can you say it again, please?
What would be a Supreme Court justice, current or former, that you would consider a model for the kind of justice you would appoint?
I still don't catch it. I'm sorry.
Why don't we go this way? How about what kind of qualifications in a Supreme Court nominee would you consider?
Well, I'll tell you, I took accounting, a major in accounting and business in college, and I know how to add. 1 and 1 make 2, not 3, like Congress thinks. And, there's so much on the backs of the working people. I mean, every illegal alien that comes into this country, and refugees, the working person has to pay for them. And we gotta eliminate these programs. And the only reason why we have so many illegal aliens is because we don't enforce the law. If we enforce the law, when the first one came in, he wouldn't be here. And we don't need to build a wall. We need to bring the soldiers back, because we can't afford anymore to police all these countries. The working person, I feel for my grandchildren. Are they going to be able to have a house? And I'll tell you, I'm going to tell you right now, I'm the only candidate that has the qualifications to turn Washington upside down, and I can do it.
Thank you, Mr. Cumley. Mr. Cook, on the Supreme Court question.
The Supreme Court, ideally, I'd like to have someone that models Thomas Jefferson and for freedom. As far as the, I think of Chief Justice Roberts right now. Someone along that caliber is who I would like to nominate to the Supreme Court. I think he would be a good, someone similar.
Mr. Evio?
I think I want to focus on ethics in the judiciary. I'm having a lot of problems with judges which are ignoring facts and making orders and judicial judgments based on bias. So I think that's a big issue. We have to tackle the bias in the courts. And in the federal courts, there's really no remedy to remove a justice at this point. So maybe some kind of legislation to enable that procedure to eliminate a justice based on bias.
Thank you. Mr. Martin.
President Reagan appointed the first woman to the Supreme Court, and I'm a little embarrassed to say I can't remember her name right now. Sandra Day O'Connor, thank you. And I thought she was a very effective justice because she came out of the political process. She'd been a state senator in Arizona, and she understood the complexities of different branches of government. Yes, she was a swing justice, but she was very effective. And she gave us what we need in this country, which is balance. Extreme right-wing judges and extreme left-wing judges really just provoke public anger. We need to work towards solutions and not towards inflaming people.
Thank you, Mr. Martin. And Mr. Robinson.
The justice whom I admire the most was Supreme Court Justice Louis Brandeis. And to me, the most famous statement that he made is that democracy can only exist when we have a majority middle class, which we no longer have today. In 1971, we had 61% middle class. Today we have 49% middle class, and that's exactly because of our enormous problem of unemployment and underemployment. On the other hand, if we look at Justice Roberts, he made an enormous mistake. He took his job as an adjudicator and decided he was going to be a legislator. That is totally unacceptable, and in fact, not even legal. What we have to do is to get people who clearly understand the difference between legislation and adjudication. In fact, there's a very nice DC Appeals Court decision, Lubrizol versus the EPA, which so clearly delineates what is legislation and what is adjudication, and that's what we need.
Thank you, Mr. Robinson. We'll begin our second round of individual questions with Mr. Evihu, and Brad, you're up.
Mr. Evihu, over the last few months, foreign policy has become one of the most important issues to the average American voter. So how can you assure us that you'd be qualified to serve as Commander-in-Chief, and what would be your chief policies?
Well, I helped in the Haitian earthquake situation. We went to the consulate there and provided as much assistance as we could. I tried to negotiate the reopening of 3 hospitals in Queens to handle the injured from Haiti. But the politics being what they were, I was told, once they get here, how do we get rid of them? My concern was their health and safety. These are the same issues which are being replicated all around the world. There's terrorism, people are being displaced. Those are the issues that we have to deal with. We have to somehow get a grasp on these people who are being forced out of their homes and provide them with a way to stay there, to protect themselves and to fight off these forces which are forcing them to move. I don't want to be in that situation. So we need to work together to make the world a safer place.
Thank you. And the next question for Andy Martin will come from John.
Thank you, Mike. Actually, I'll pose this to Mr. Martin, but I'd like to try to get everyone's opinion on it because it is a very important issue. Secretary of State John Kerry says that, quote, the world is safer today because of the Iranian nuclear deal. And he said it accelerated the release of the 5 American prisoners who've been held in Iran. Do you agree with that, or do you disagree with that statement, and why?
I disagree with it, and actually my experience, Mr. DeStacio, is unique. I was in Iran in 1979 after the hostages were taken, and I was back in Iran alone in 1980. So I have actually dealt with the Iranians person to person, alone in that country, and I managed to get along with them. My problem with what Secretary Kerry did and what the President did is that I believe they were too anxious for a deal. And as a result, I think, frankly, that Donald Trump has the better of the argument when he says they negotiated a bad deal. They're not good negotiators. I think we could have done a better deal. I think we should have done a better deal. And I'm concerned that we may not be safer. You know, today as I was coming over here to this meeting, the elders, I'm not sure what the technical term is, they took thousands of candidates for office off the ballot in Iran. That's not a democracy. That isn't popular stuff. So it's still a very dangerous and unstable theocracy, and I'm not sure we can trust them.
Why don't we hear, as John said, from the other candidates. Mr. Robinson.
You're asking about, well, first of all, we need a strong military because evil has no respect for weakness. Number 2, in the year 2010, the European Court of Human Rights, there was a question that took place in Cyprus, and the Muslims are the people who proposed, and the court agreed with them, that in the case of the Christian Greeks who were forced out of their homes in the Turkish section of Cyprus were not entitled to go back to their homes, but they were entitled to compensation. I think all we have to do is take that human rights court, European court decision, and put it together and be very frank about solving the Israeli-Arab problem, and you'll find a lot of peace in this world. The one thing that we accomplished with Iran is we've made much closer friends between Saudi Arabia and Israel, and that's where we stand today.
Mr. Cook, on the Iran question.
I'm not favorable of the deal. In fact, Iran, the Muslim government, has stated they hate us and they hate Israel. We're willing to help. Basically, the deal will help enable them give nuclear weapons, but yet our own government wants to disarm the citizens. That just simply doesn't make sense. And in fact, by giving the Iran deal, Iran is one of the largest state sponsors of terrorism. As a result of America with the deal, that makes America now the largest state sponsor of terrorism by funding Iran. That's simply wrong.
Mr. Comley on the Iran deal.
I know Kerry, and he knows my family. I don't agree with the deal because he was going in the reverse direction. You know, in 1941, Pearl Harbor, we lost 200 soldiers. 9/11, we lost 3,000 people.
2,000.
And I have information that was given to me by insiders inside the Nuclear Regulatory Commission, and it threatens 3 million citizens in New Hampshire, in Massachusetts, and beyond. You know, I watched the PBS the other night, the documentary on bombs. Do you know that we have 60,000 nuclear warheads, and we tell Iran they can't have one? Do you think that's going to sell? It's not going to sell. We should be disarmed. We should take the leadership in disarming nuclear weapons. We should do it. And if we don't, you know, you're going to keep giving the terrorists. We got to take the lead in disarmament. You have to. And if you don't, we're going to have a nuclear disaster in this country, a lot worse than Chernobyl or Fukushima. Because I get the evidence that shows it. And the NRC's been covering it up. And it's in weapons,
Thank
too.
you, Mr. Comley. We're going to try and be fair again to all the candidates.
I don't agree with Kerry. No, he's going in the reverse direction.
Mr. Review, we'll give you a chance to answer this question on the Iran deal.
Doesn't make any sense.
The answer, I guess, is a yes and a no. Yes, it's good to get Americans released. No, because it's dangerously close to paying for the hostages to be released. Those are my concerns. As a World Trade Center family member and a first responder, I'm also concerned about the judgments that were placed against Iran, whether those funds are going to be released. It's a very complicated issue. I don't have all the information. I would have to see if we're making real progress with bringing Iran into the world community. And from that, I would have to make my decision.
Thank you. Staying on foreign policy, I'll pose this question to you, Mr. Robinson. President Obama has said that he will present to Congress this year a plan to close the detention center at Guantanamo Bay. If Congress doesn't act, though, he has said he's considering using his executive authority to do so. What do you think the president should do? And if you were president, what would you do with the detention center at Guantanamo?
We know that President Obama has issued more executive orders than the other president before him. Issuing executive orders means that the person is not a president but a dictator. A president's job is to preside over a legislating Congress. That's number one. Number two, he said 8 years ago he was going to empty Guantanamo Bay, and obviously he hasn't done so. So I think that's just a perfectly good example of somebody who's decided to be a dictator and not a president.
Can I get a show of hands from the other candidates? How many of you would keep the detention center in Guantanamo Bay open?
I would put Hillary Clinton there.
What do you say? You put Hillary Clinton there. Oh.
And Mr. Review, you say you wouldn't. Would you close it down?
We're going through a process where we're bringing Cuba into the world community. So I think I'd have to see what happens with that meshing of Cuba with the rest of the Caribbean and the United States.
Okay, I'll pose the next question to Mr. Comley from Brad.
Mr. Comley, Mr. Martin just brought up Donald Trump. And Donald Trump seems to have fundamentally changed the nature of the Republican race. So what's your take on Mr. Trump and the policies he's raised, particularly immigration?
Mr. Donald Trump, I think, you know, he's getting, the polls numbers are up there is because it's the people are very angry about what's going on in Washington. And immigration, you know, if they're illegal and they got a record, we're going to send them back in a cab. And every illegal alien that's in the country right now has got to be held accountable from the time they broke the law. Either they got to pay a lot more taxes, or they're going to keep coming here. You got to hold them accountable. You've got to enforce the laws, and we aren't doing it. The Bible says, order is the law of heaven. We got chaos in this country. It's a mess, and we got to fix it. And we all got to fix it. We got to be involved. We just can't complain about it. The working person, I don't know how they're doing it. And we got to rescue them. And I got informants coming to me on every issue. It's not just nuclear. I got Medicaid fraud coming to me.
Thank you, Mr. Conley.
Because Obamacare is going to destroy the quality of care that hospitals and nursing homes are able to deliver. Because the refugees...
Thank you, Mr. Conley. We're going to have to move on.
Workers are going to pay for all that, and they can't do it.
Why don't we hear from some of the other candidates on Mr. Trump? Mr. Martin, why don't you go ahead?
Well, I've had a unique relationship with Donald Trump. Shortly after he married his first wife, he wanted to move into my building. And I was on the board of directors of the building where he wanted to move. And normally I used to approve the contracts because I was in the building during the day. And so I like to tease and say I'm the only person that's ever said you're hired to Donald Trump because I signed off and approved his lease. He was a tenant. And I also was an informal advisor to the architects at Trump Tower. On balance, I think Trump's influence in the campaign has been positive. He brings an incredible amount of energy. He comes from outside the process. He threatens the established order. And all of those are good. We have an encrusted bureaucracy, political, Republicans, Democrats. Both parties are corrupt. It's not just the Democrats. It's not just the Republicans. And Trump has pluses and minuses, but on balance, I think he's been a tremendously positive force in this election.
Thank you. Mr. Robinson, there are some Republicans who say if Donald Trump is the nominee, they wouldn't support him. Would you support Donald Trump if he was the nominee?
I would like to know who the Democrat is before I make a decision in that particular situation. I thought you were going to ask me about the situation on immigration in general, and if I may respond to that as well. My father, his sisters and brothers, my 4 grandparents were all immigrants to this country. People are immigrants to this country for 2 reasons. They're looking for work, and they're looking to live in a democratic society. And therefore, what we have to do is, there is plenty of room for them in this country. What we have to do is realize, how do we employ them with decent paying jobs, and how do we give them the opportunity to be legal, just like my father and my grandparents did. My father happened to come from Ireland, so it turns out that when I was born in Boston, not only am I a citizen of the U.S., I'm a citizen of Ireland as well. But that's my point. That's what we're here for, and that's what I want to do. I want to cut out all this baloney, all this unemployment that we have in this country, which is the real problem, convert it to coal. And I have 3 other projects of employing people. We have 7 states that don't have enough water. I have to stop.
We'll have a chance to come back to some of those topics later.
Yeah.
Mr. Cook, the next question to you will come from John.
Well, I'm just going to stay with that because Mr. Trump has been accused, sometimes of going overboard, not only by Democrats, but by some in his own party, especially when he proposed a temporary ban on allowing people of Muslim faith into the United States. Do you feel that that's a legitimate response to some of the situations that this country's been faced with over the last couple of months?
Well, I think that ISIS does pose a real threat. Also, I don't want to exclude anybody just solely on their religious beliefs. But you have to wonder, is Islam really a religion? Or is it more of the Nazis believed that Nazism was also a religion? And I don't believe we would allow Nazis into the United States during World War II. But from certain areas of the world, I would restrict Muslims from entering. I would not take the Syrian refugees. If America wants to contribute, let them go somewhere else. Why can't we send them to another country that's willing? But an outright ban, no.
Mr. Evie, why don't we hear the same question to you?
I think that people want to move for safety, that they choose places to come based on their need for safety. There are lots of ways to immigrate into the United States. There are EB-5 visas, which we provide for people. That's if someone wants to invest in a company in the United States, they're able to get EB-5 visas to come here. There are lots of ways to bring people here. There are lots of ways to protect ourselves from these radicals. And that's what they are. It's a group of radicals which are offending everybody's standard of decency. And they just can't be tolerated. We need to make a stand against these radicals, not against the entire population. I think we need to be charitable in our giving of these immigration visas.
Thank you. Mr. Martin, I'll pose the next question to you. One of the things that Donald Trump has recently contributed to the dialogue is questioning whether Senator Ted Cruz is constitutionally eligible to be President of the United States. What are your thoughts on that question?
Well, actually, I have to keep an open mind because I'm having a forum next weekend in Washington and I've written to Senator Cruz and asked for some documentation. You have to balance the intent of the founding fathers with the power of the people in this room and in this nation to interpret the Constitution for our own needs and times. I'm clear that the founders intended for that natural born citizen clause to have a restrictive view. But I'm also clear that society has basically loosened those requirements. I think it's a debatable question where Mr. Cruz falls. I mean, I was involved in the Obama dispute and created it, perhaps. Obama had 2 of the 3 qualifications. He was born here, and his mother was an American. He lacked 1. Cruz has only 1 of them, the mother. He was born in Canada, and his father was Cuban. So it's a tough question, and that's why I'm sponsoring a conference, to give people a chance to talk. I have an open mind on it, but I think it's a legitimate question, and I think whether you're a conservative or a liberal scholar, they do agree that it's a point of reasonable debate and discussion.
We'll do another show of hands here on the panel. Who thinks that Ted Cruz is not constitutionally eligible to be the President of the United States? Just Mr. Robinson. Mr. Robinson, would you support a constitutional amendment to change and to strike the natural born citizen clause?
It is true that it's restrictive. We remember when Mr. McCain was running for president, he was born in the Panama Canal Zone because his father was in the military. Now, obviously, a person who's in the military and therefore located at that moment in time outside the country with his family, you obviously cannot in any way restrict that person from running for president of the United States. The question is whether or not someone born in Canada, as you say, born outside the United States, where one parent was an American citizen, the person obviously got American citizen through his mother. So was he born as an American citizen? Yes. And what does the Constitution have to say about that?
Thank you, Mr. Robinson. Next question from to Mr. Cumley will come from Brad.
Mr. Cumley, New Hampshire and Massachusetts are both going through drug epidemics. Since just 2 years ago, drug deaths in New Hampshire have doubled. So what would you do as president to stem the tide?
On drugs?
Yeah.
Force the law. You know, our kids have got a lot of temptations. We don't need families growing drugs in the backyard. We don't need it. We need to enforce the law. And the price of freedom, you know, the Statue of Liberty's out there. You can't discriminate from people coming in here. But if you enforce the law, if they do something wrong, you know, the price of freedom, we got the KKK still here. And we got Muslims coming in here. You enforce the law when they break it. That's what you do. And we gotta all live, we gotta learn to live on this planet in a safe way. And you gotta enforce the law in order for that to happen. We wouldn't have the 12 million illegal aliens if we had enforced the law in the beginning. Well, we're not doing it. What do we do with rapists? We send them to prison for 5 years and we let them out for good behavior. And that woman or man's got to live with that the rest of his life, or her life. We don't have enough prisons because we don't enforce the law.
Thank you, Mr. Cumley.
And we need more if we're going to.
Because this heroin epidemic is such an important issue in New Hampshire, we should probably hear from all the candidates on that. Why don't we go down the road? Mr. Cook, why don't you continue on this question?
Well, my view is this. As president, preside over the United States. The United States Constitution establishes powers for the federal government. What is not for the federal government falls back to the states. The federal government, in my view, is to protect the citizens of the United States from foreign powers, as well as enemies, foreign and domestic, which we do have enemies within. I also think, as well as, time's almost up, but basically it's a states' right issue. The federal government is to negotiate trade deals and protect national interests, and that is a states' right issue, and individual states should handle it.
Mr. Eveshue, what would you do as president to help address the heroin epidemic?
The heroin epidemic is really an abuse issue. It's a medical issue. I'm a nurse. I was trained as a nurse practitioner, but denied that degree. I would have to say that there has to be a medical issue that has to be resolved with that individual. Now, the second part to that is the illicit drugs generates illicit cash, which is being used all around the world for terrorism or just criminal activity. Somehow we have to grasp this extra money being derived by criminals selling heroin illegally, and maybe there's a process that we can do with treatment and getting some kind of legitimate sale through of these products like tobacco, like alcohol. They all have issues, medical issues, and they should all be treated the same, and people should be treated to relieve these dependencies.
Mr. Martin, the same question to you.
Well, if I was the president, the first thing I would do is declare the war against drugs over. It's been a failure, and that was one war we don't have to negotiate a peace treaty for. Secondly, I would acknowledge that, at least in New Hampshire, as I walked down Highway 3 opposing a local transmission line, the Northern Pass, I saw just hopelessly derelict homes. I saw people that were unemployed that are living on assistance. I saw factories across the Connecticut River that had been closed in Vermont. They exported the jobs. And I believe that economic urgency and economic failure and economic pressures creates the conditions where people will turn to drugs. So a strong economy would be a helpful bulwark. I don't want to call it a states' right issue, but I think a president can also use the bully pulpit to encourage the states to balance compassion with law enforcement. There has to be balance, and that's what we lack today.
And Mr. Robinson, same question.
We know that 40% of white males have a police record by age 23. A lot of this, of course, is in drugs. Why are they dealing in drugs? Because they're unemployed. There is no decent middle-class employment in this country. We have over 30% unemployed. We have another 30% that are underemployed, Walmart wages. And that's exactly the reason why people turn to drugs to make a living, because they want to eat, they want to pay the rent or whatever their expenses are. And that's what has to be done. We have to create honest employment with middle-class wages, and that's exactly what I'm talking about from day one. That will solve most of your problems.
Thank you, Mr. Robinson. John, you'll ask the next question, and we'll pose it to Mr. Cook.
Switching gears, Mr. Cook, a little bit. Throughout on New Hampshire's airwaves are ads, and more ads, political ads, not only from candidates, of course, from super PACs. And of course, a lot of that was spurred by the Citizens United decision in 2010. Do you agree with the Citizens United ruling that PACs and super PACs have as much right as any individual to express their political preference by making unlimited expenditures? Is this something that, as some Republicans and certainly many Democrats say, needs to be reined in and restricted?
Well, I think there needs to be a lot done as far as the FEC regulations to how campaigns are allowed to broadcast, especially some of the free publicity that's allowed to some candidates but not allowed to other candidates. Now, as far as some of these super PACs, I recently got an email from which I thought was Carly for America, and it ended up being we're not affiliated for a candidate. So some of these PACs are using candidates' names and make people think, I wouldn't have donated anyway. We're making people think that they're donating to a particular candidate, and that's wrong. They need to be tighter regulations how they identify themselves and pay for the ads. But I do think it's an individual's right that they can pay for anything they want, whether they're a group of individuals or a political candidate, for an ad.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Cook. Mr. Cumley, President Obama used his State of the Union address last week to call for a better politics in this country. He talked about redistricting reform, among other things, as well as campaign finance reform. What would you like to see done if you were President of the United States to reform the political system in this country?
The only way you're going to reform the political corruption in Washington is for the people to get involved and rise up in a peaceful way. But they got to make their, they got to get involved, and they got to make their voice heard. As far as, you know, both parties, you know, they keep, they're in charge, and we let them in charge. And we complain for years about it, but unless you're involved, it's not going to change. And together, we can repair America. We really can, but you got to get involved. And as far as, you know, I don't have the money to finance the TV stations, that's for sure. And my single mother never gave me $1 million for a grub steak. But you know, I'm the only candidate running right now that has all the qualifications that turn Washington upside down. And I'm going to do it. Raleigh's the only town in the whole United States that got 80% of their town on a petition to investigate the NRC. You know what Mr. Reagan did? He wouldn't see me.
Thank you, Mr. Cumley. I want to ask for a show of hands here. I want to ask, as we're talking about the political process here, how many of the members of this panel here running for office now, running for President of the United States, have run for any office before in your life? How many of you have run for President of the United States before this year? Okay.
I'd just like to ask real quick, since we're on this topic, if I may, Mike, does anyone support the concept of public financing, which many say would even the playing field? Public financing, taxpayer funding of elections, of candidates. Does anyone see that as a viable alternative?
John, as a constitutional expert, I can tell you we are in a straitjacket because of the First Amendment. The states have a lot more freedom. There are states that engage in public financing because they're not bound by that First Amendment. I don't know the answer to your question, and I don't know that a better system necessarily can be produced. The only thing that troubles me about the existing system, and of course I watch your TV station every night, it's not a plug, but it's a necessity, and you look at these ads and it says, vote for this guy, it's Citizens for the Good Works, you know, and the Committee for Babies and Puppies, and we think Marco Rubio's a bad guy. What the Supreme Court left open in Citizens United was disclosure laws and full disclosure. And I think that's where we have to start. But we cannot make progress as long as we have chief executives who hate politics and hate people. That was Obama's weakness. I'm sorry to say it's also Mrs. Clinton's. I think Trump could actually get people to talk.
Mr. Cook, I saw you raise your hand as well.
Yeah, I would like to comment to that. As far as public financing, I do see public financing as a possible viable alternative. What I really see in a presidential election now, when you have all the public debates, is the candidates with all the money. Yeah, they spend their money advertising, putting all the TV ads, but you have debates. People are really interested. They can see the news, they can watch the debates. You need to have a better road to have equal access to the debates. With the internet now, we don't really need to have campaigns putting TV ads all the time. We need to have a better way, like if the FEC can have an individual poll to qualify you, or states, Secretary of State have a poll where the voters can qualify and use that as well as the current polling to see who qualifies for the debates, instead of the current cherry picking to see who's allowed to be on TV. And then if you're on TV, you get more support, more money, and therefore, but if you're not included in the polls, then no one ever gets a chance to vote for you, and that's not fair. Because I honestly think if I was in the polls, I would be on the debate, because I've got 20 to 25% of North Carolina support in elections before.
Thank you, Mr. Cook.
Anyone else want to talk about public financing? Who hasn't?
The government right now owes over $17 trillion. We're bankrupt. If we were to pay off the principal at $1 million a day, it would take 50,000 years to pay that debt. Don't believe me? Take $17 trillion divided by $1 million a day, up to 17 million days, that's 50,000 years. The debt is unbelievable. What we have to do is to start paying off that debt so our grandchildren and great-grandchildren don't pay it, number one, and number two, so the foreigners, because a lot of this money is we owe to the Chinese, the Japanese, and the Saudis some $4 trillion, they're going to foreclose on us, frankly. And therefore, the only way to do that is to develop private enterprise, employing lots of people, paying the middle-class wages through, I'm sorry, what was the term I used? Through profit sharing, and pay the taxes. Also, if you're an employee and your taxes are being withheld, there's no reason for you to file an income tax return. We can get rid of probably 60,000 out of the 85,000 people who work for the IRS. Let's not spend money. Let's figure out how we can cut down our expenses and how we're going to make money and how we're going to pay taxes to balance our budget and pay off our debt. It's ridiculous.
We should take money from the illegal aliens to help finance the deficit. And in fact, $100,000 fine.
They're collecting welfare. We should put them to work and let their taxes pay off the debt. That's exactly what I'm saying.
Mr. Review, I'll pose the next.
You're not going to throw them out of the country.
I'll pose the next question to you. In a recent debate, Senator Ted Cruz was discussing New York values, and Donald Trump had a response to that. As somebody from New York, what do you consider to be New York values?
I think we're friendly. We say hi, we smile, we give you directions. Come to New York, we'll show you a good time. That's what New York is about. And I'm sure that's what the United States is about. So let's all invite people here as tourists and build our economy. That's the way to pay off $17 trillion.
Okay, Brett, next question will go to Mr. Martin.
Mr. Martin, we've been talking about the cost of campaigning, but I want to talk about the cost of college. There are several students here. What should be done to keep college tuition costs down?
Well, I know what can't be done, and that's to accept simplistic solutions like the Democrats are saying, the so-called Mitt Romney free stuff approach. We've got to work on cutting some of the overhead. You know, when I went to school at the University of Illinois, and I was a football player, so we had more benefits, and we ate pressed turkey and a slice of lettuce, and that tomato looked like it had been sitting around the refrigerator for a couple of days. We didn't have fancy dorms and pools and all this. So today the college experience has become like luxury living. That's why it's so expensive. And we've got to think about whether we can have experiences for people that want to work and get an education and don't want to be in a 4-star hotel when they're there. I survived quite nicely on pressed turkey and Jell-O, and nobody gets that today because we think, in fact, they're tearing down my old dormitory. I went home for homecoming, and I mean, these were barracks. Today they're building high-rise luxury places for the students. Well, of course, that costs money. So there's a little hypocrisy in the high cost of college because the experience has radically changed since I went to college.
Let's hear from some of the other candidates on that, because the cost of college has become such a major issue in this campaign. Mr. Comley, what would your first step be as president to address the cost of college?
As far as colleges go? You know, when I went to college, I was working 3 days a week in a cereal factory from 6 o'clock at night till 6:30 in the morning, and then I go to class at 7. And I think students should be working instead of taking so many loans out, because education's not free, just like health care. It's not free. And I think that the gentleman just talked about the high rises and whatnot. You know, there's a way to cut costs in colleges, administrations, and whatnot. But you gotta focus on it. And it's not, and the students, they should be working because that gives them experience in the working force. And Northeastern College does that, you know. Well, you could cut costs, for heaven's sakes. All you have to do as an accountant, you can add. And if you're getting abuse in it, you could find it if you want to look for it. College can be cheaper. It can, if you work on it and you focus on where you can cut costs.
Mr. Cook, do you have any ideas that you think would bring down the cost of college?
Yes, I'm actually a college student, by the way. I work as a company. For example, last year I essentially had 3 roles at a multinational company. I was lab manager, quality manager, and acting plant manager. I was also finishing up an MBA in marketing from Liberty University, which I finished in December, as well as North Carolina State Master of Engineering, which I'm still a student of that program. I I do think you should have more of your tuition should come off your taxes. That's what I feel.
Mr. Evie?
Tuition is a big issue. When I first went to school in the 70s, tuition was very cheap, especially at City University. And then as I continued to go to school, tuitions grew more and more. And as I was doing my nurse practitioner program, I exposed VNS Medicaid fraud. And the director of the nursing department at Newman College retaliated. She fired one professor, gave me 2 Fs in those courses, and then I'm ending up with $80,000 in debt from that tuition that I never got a degree from because I exposed Medicaid fraud by VNS. So it's too much money for a non-degree. And a lot of people are being destroyed. If they fail to make the degree, they've got this big chunk of money they have to pay back. The government's nice because it extends your ability to pay back based on your ability to pay. So I think it's too expensive. We need to do more online teaching so that we don't need as many facilities. We can use the internet to teach.
Thank you. Mr. Robinson, we'll give you a chance to weigh in on this topic as well.
When I went to college, it was $1,500 a year for tuition. When my children went to college, it was $25,000 a year for tuition. Incomes did not increase by that much in that amount of time. The big difference was that all of a sudden all this loan money was available, and the colleges decided to take advantage of that fact, and that's what really created the problem, because we know how many of these loans are not being repaid properly. I think that what we have to do is to say the student, first say to the colleges, you can forget these very high tuition rates. You're going to have to drop them down because we're not giving the loans anymore, and the student has to work to pay for it, and let him work to pay for it, and it'll be the best experience of his lifetime.
Okay, we're going to give each candidate a chance to ask a closing statement, to give a closing statement. But John, why don't you pose one more question to the panel here before we do that?
I would. We haven't gotten to the federal deficit, and I think that everyone should probably weigh in on that. And I know that's a big question for a short period of time, but in a nutshell, what would you cut? Would you cut taxes? Would you increase taxes for someone? What are the main components of your proposal to deal with this federal deficit, which I believe now is up in the neighborhood of $439 billion, according to at least as of last month? And while you're at it, how's your party controls Congress? How are they doing?
Mr. Crumley, why don't we start with you?
Would I cut taxes? You got to cut taxes, and you got to give businesses less taxes too, and you got to cut capital gains because they got to reinvest in this America, and create jobs. They're the ones that take the whiffs. You know, Obama, you know, he wants to penalize somebody that took the risk and to create jobs and whatnot. It's incredible. He's the dictator, and I mean, if you're gonna have more jobs and have companies invest, then you got to cut taxes. This is a capitalistic society. It's not socialism. And they're the ones that they penalize people for being successful in creating jobs, and they dictate to them. And that's going to encourage them to reinvest in America. And as far as taxes go, you know, we got to cut taxes. But the way we're going now, and we got to eliminate the deficit. If you don't eliminate the deficit first, and there's ways to do it.
Mr. Robinson?
And you got to find the programs that are waste and are on the backs of the working person, because they're the only.
Mr. Robinson, we'll go to you now. Thank you, Mr. Crumley. Mr. Robinson, to your plan for the deficit.
They spend it.
The only way that we're going to clean up this deficit, clean up this enormous, enormous debt that we have, is by creating the employment in the private sector and paying middle-class wages. And that means developing our coal. It means the 7 states that don't have enough water, using reverse osmosis, which is an economic way of converting ocean water to drinking water for these 7 states, up and down the coast of California, up and down the coast of Texas, and the pipelines to distribute this water to the present and future population agricultural centers of these states. Number 3, excuse me, number 3, we're going to develop an automobile that, which happens to be one of my areas as well, that not only will give you a nice ride in the car, not only, but it will give you at least 50 miles to the gallon at 60 miles an hour. That happens to be one of my areas of expertise as well. And the 4th area is, of course, Oh dear, I've forgotten the fourth area. I'm sorry, but there's a fourth area. Oh, I can't.
We'll ask Rick Perry for
Fourth
that.
area, creating jobs in middle class pay that will then pay taxes, and we don't need all these people in income tax, because once you take out the pay, once you take out the income taxes, there's no reason for them to file an income tax return. That's how you pay off the debt.
Thank you,
Get
Mr.
people into the private sector, millions and millions of them.
Mr. Evahue, your plan for the deficit.
Well, the deficit is about money, and money is about making businesses grow. And we have a whole new prospect of exploring space and using mining, bringing asteroids of rare metals to the United States, bringing things that we need from space. We also have the opportunity that the European Space Agency is proposing a colony on the moon to provide for different avenues of manufacturing. And that's what we're doing now. So I think we should, as a world, invest in exploiting the resources of other planets that are nearby. And that will help reduce the deficit that we have.
Andy Martin.
Well, as I was coming over here, I checked the Wall Street Journal webpage, and there was a story that for the first time since 2009, Congress has voted to increase the deficit. So I think my Republican friends were making good progress in cutting the share of the national output that's claimed by government. They were making some genuine progress and trying to rein in the spending. But they slipped off the wagon, as it were, and I don't think the explanation that was given that Mr. Boehner was retiring and so he shoveled all the stuff in the garage is good. Eternal vigilance is the price of democracy, of a strong, healthy economy, and working to live within our means. And it's something that the Republican Party is for in theory, but doesn't always come through in fact. And I think that's a weakness of the Republican Party. I do not favor tax cuts. I do not believe the propaganda about so-called job creators. And frankly, I think we have a long way to go to make ourselves a more consumer-friendly and working family-friendly party. And I'm committed to that. That's one of the reasons I'm running.
And Mr. Cook, last but not least on this question.
Okay, first of all, the Republican Congress is not doing a good job. I think the first thing we need to do is secure the borders. And the second thing would be to cut off any aid to illegal aliens. The third thing would be we have a spending problem. We need to go through line by line and justify every expense on our budget and reduce and eliminate unnecessary spending. And I do think job creation can be created. If someone wants to invest in an entrepreneur, they should be able to invest and have that as deduction from their taxes.
Thank you. Now we'll give each of our candidates a final 1-minute closing argument to the voters of New Hampshire. We'll go in reverse alphabetical order this time to Mr. Robinson.
As I said earlier, the only way to solve our 4 problems of unemployment, terrorism, immigration, and government debt is to get people working, everybody working in the private sector through various means, whether it be, as I said before, opening up our coal sources, whether it be providing water, whether it be building, whether it be making intercontinental commercial, commercial aircraft that fly supersonic aircraft to fly from our east coast to Europe and from our west coast to Hawaii and to the Far East. There's no reason in this world for our not building such aircraft in this country. President Nixon killed it. It was a bad mistake, and we should be doing that because that's also another area where millions of people can be employed in the private sector, paying good taxes, and that's the only way you're going to solve the problems. All 4 problems in this country is get people working in the private sector, paying them on a profit-sharing basis so that they have middle-class wages, so we can go back to what Judge Brandeis said, you want democracy, you have to have a majority middle class.
Thank you, Mr. Robinson. Andy Martin.
Well, I hope that those who are watching on television will get some appreciation for why New Hampshire is such a special place. We actually live democracy. We struggle to keep the government share of our output limited. And there's a good reason why we're first in the nation. And we owe a great debt to Secretary of State Bill Gardner over there. And I sort of consider him the field marshal of the first in the nation primary. But He knows that I'm one of his regimental commanders, and I'm there to help him in any way possible, and to unleash whatever has to be unleashed to fight to keep New Hampshire first. I think we do a good job. I think we're fair and impartial. The very fact that we have a meeting which offers those who are lesser known a voice is so important in maintaining the openness of our state and our society. And that's a good idea. I don't have anything bad to say about New York or California or Texas, but they're such huge places. They couldn't offer the public the option that we have today. So New Hampshire is first in the nation. Bill Gardner is fighting to keep it that way, and I'm marching right behind him. That's not a Second Amendment issue, but we're locked and loaded to be first in the nation.
Walter Evahue.
Well, the people out there have to spend time to evaluate who they think the people are that they want to represent them. It's a very complicated field. Lots of people, 30 and 30. There's 60 people registered in New Hampshire alone. The press does a fair job of providing information about some of the candidates, not all of the candidates. But we have the internet. There are ways to research individual people to find out where they stand and whether you can trust them. Trust them to back you and to protect you. That's where New Hampshire and Iowa has to decide who their candidate is and disregard the bigger voices and give the smaller voices a chance. Thank you all.
Thank you. Tim Cook.
All right. Thank you for having me here and for everybody coming out in the cold to listen. First of all, America is not a democracy. America is a republic. The Founding Fathers knew and spoke of a democracy being two wolves and a sheep voting on what to have for dinner, whereas a republic is a well-armed sheep. And so I like to say America is a republic. Please visit me on Twitter, Tim Cook 2016. You can see my Twitter poll where I polled everyone, including some Democrats, Hillary's name. I could beat Hillary one-on-one, or visit timcook2016.com. I'll fight for you, and please support me. Thank you.
And Stephen Conley, the last question.
I'm running for President of the United States because none of the candidates that have poll numbers are telling you the truth. They're not telling you the truth about health care, not telling you the truth about ISIS, and I found it out. I get military people telling me exactly how they feel, and it's not pretty. We don't need another politician or another dynasty in the White House, or the start of another dynasty. We need a business person in the White House that can add. And I've been a business person and a farmer since I was 13. And I know how to add. I'm an accountant, and I've been an administrator for over 50 years. But you got to tell the truth to the American people, and you got to help the working people, or you're not going to have those programs in Washington. And I'll eliminate them, and I promise you that. And please remember my website, because there's more information coming out. And the government is going to be after me again, because I've admitted to the tape recordings that they say I have, and were after for over 30 years. And the only person I'm going to give those tape recordings to is Obama. I wrote to him when
Mr. Conley, I'm going to come after you now because your time is up. I want to thank all of our Republican, lesser-known candidates for joining us tonight. We're going to take a 10-minute break while we... We'll take a 10-minute break while we set up the dais here for our larger field of Democratic candidates, and we'll be back in 10 minutes. All right.
What a day. Nice meeting you.
Nice meeting you, sir.
Keep your eye on my website.
Okay, I think we were just waiting on one more name tag for one of our candidates here, but while we're waiting on that, let's introduce our next group of candidates here. We have, I think, 20 Democratic candidates. I'm going to start by request for our viewers on C-SPAN and WMUR. When you're answering a question, if you can make sure you're speaking into a microphone so that the viewers are able to hear your answers. And we're going from 5 candidates to 20 candidates, and so we're going to do our best to make sure, as we did in the last debate, that we keep things as fair as we can, make sure everybody has a chance to answer some of the questions. But we'll also probably do more in terms of show of hands questions and pan the group quickly on some of the issues to make sure that everyone has a chance to make their voices known on the various issues. And so with that, we're going to begin with our 2-minute opening statements, and we'll start in the front with John Adams of New York.
Thanks, Mike. Well, first I should introduce myself because I'm relatively unknown. We did an internal poll which showed me only at about 1.5% name recognition. I'm a former college philosophy professor and a former assistant state attorney general, and I'm running for president because I believe in a better tomorrow. I believe we need to have some other options. A little more about me, though. Everything I've done for my entire life, it's been kind of behind the scenes, but I've been quietly supporting Democrats my entire life. I've been leading from the shadows in sort of a way. I've been requesting and asking for special forces to fight extremism in the Middle East ever since I ran for Congress in 2007. And President Obama finally adopted that about a month ago. He sent more special forces, so I applaud that. Bernie Sanders recently adopted my position on ISIS and Russia, that we need to work with Russia to combat ISIS, and that ISIS needs to be the priority. Priority was my word, adopted by Bernie, so I want to thank him for that. I also want to thank him for adopting my position on student loan interest rates. It was my position that we have to cut those in half and have to keep moving forward in a way that makes sense for everyone. So I'm looking forward to getting to talk to you more, getting to meet all of you. I thank you very much. I'd also like to thank Jim for introducing marriage equality. Jim Splain over there, he introduced marriage equality in 2009 in New Hampshire, and I'd like to thank New Hampshire for being the first in the nation, for being the guardians of the presidential election process. How much time do I have left here? I'm not familiar with this. Okay, thank you. Thank you very much. I'd like to thank New Hampshire for being the guardians of the presidential election process. You know, I'm targeting New Hampshire. I'm not running in Iowa. My name is John Adams, so I've really got a New England connection. I really feel that if people take a look at my campaign, at what I'm supporting, at what I've done for my entire life, I'm a lifelong Democrat. I wanted to vote for Jimmy Carter when I was 5 years old because I felt he would be better for the country. And so everything I've done, from marriage equality in 2002 with an Attorney General opinion that I wrote, all the way down to water rights. I look at this wonderful clean water we have, and I think of Flint. I'm John Adams. Please take a look at my website, adamsforpresident.com.
Thank you, Mr. Adams. Next is Rocky De La Fuente of San Diego, California.
Thank you. As the only person from California, both Democrat and Republican, I'm here representing the great state of California. But anyway, I'm going to try to keep it under those 2 minutes, not like your previous speakers. So start counting now. Thank you. I'm Rocky De La Fuente. I consider myself lucky to have been born in San Diego. Through hard work and persistence, I have become successful and have international knowledge and experience. I am very proud to be Hispanic, very proud to be Latin. It's my heritage. I know how it feels to be forced to jump through hoops and to have to prove yourself over and over again. And I know most of us have faced the same types of hurdles in our daily lives, just like my fellow candidates. However, I have always found a way to overcome them, just like I did in Massachusetts, Michigan, and North Carolina, in Charlotte, Wisconsin. In case you did not know, I qualified today over 30 ballots. I'm in 30 states, including American Samoa and Americans abroad. In addition, voters in Ohio will have only 3 choices on the Democratic candidates: Clinton, Sanders, and myself. O'Malley did not qualify in Ohio. So the race technically is decided, if it's decided by the Ohio voters, it's going to be by 3 different people. And I expect to do a very good showing in Ohio and a few other states. I'm tired of the Republicans blaming the Democrats and the Democrats blaming the Republicans. In the meantime, nothing gets done. Our potholes, our bridges, and our homeless are ignored while Washington does absolutely nothing. We've become the divided states, not the United States, and we are forced to listen to the campaign of speeches with ignorance, arrogance, and hate, as opposed to wisdom and respect. In that regard, I am pleased to be here tonight to honor the First Amendment, Last week, I was present in the brown and black debate, which was created to share our views. There was no browns or blacks. I'm here today because Ronald Reagan, John Kennedy, Martin Luther King, and other leaders are not here. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Next is Eric Elbit of Groton, Massachusetts.
Thank you. On October 1st, I returned from several months of conducting focus groups in Indonesia. I was so troubled by what those focus groups showed about the future that I decided to enter the first primary in the country as a place, a forum to discuss those ideas and move things toward a whole new area of understanding. I'll leave those troubles to use during the question time. What I'd like to share with you is a solution that I see and that I have not heard in this campaign. And that is, right now the Middle East is divided between Sunni and Shia fighting each other the way the Protestants and the Catholics did for a long time. And the nation states are drawn by the old colonial powers who used divide and conquer as a way to play them off against each other. So the Sunni and Shia are continuing to fight these proxy wars that we're playing a role in. My suggestion is that we redraw the map of the Middle East so that we create Sunni countries and Shia countries. That would allow democracy to take hold, because democracy needs the confidence of one people advancing one way of life, instead of using dictatorial powers to suppress your opponents. So that is an idea I'd like to inject into this campaign. I come from that by having directed a program at Harvard training Middle East elites. I was the director of a national strategy think tank for President Obama, and I'm currently the CEO of a strategy national security corporation in Washington, D.C. The last thing I want to raise, and I have only a little bit of time, is the other best kept secret of this campaign is the amazing president we have in Barack Obama. He's the greatest president of my lifetime, and I started with Harry Truman. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Our next candidate is Bill French from Middleburg, Massachusetts.
My name is Bill French. I am a single dad with a Stanford economics degree, a Harvard MBA, and a successful business. The middle class in the U.S. is hurting. You cannot support a family on $7.25 an hour, but a $15 minimum wage will bankrupt many businesses and hurt exports and the economy. So what do? For everyone earning less than $15 an hour, the government should make up half the difference between their pay and $15 an hour. How do we finance this? We would finance it with this supplement with a 25% tax on imports from China. Free trade is not working between the United States and China. We import $480 billion a year, and we export $120. The U.S. will receive about $75 billion a year in new revenues from this tax, and about 2 million jobs will be created in the U.S., saving about $30 billion in welfare. We should adjust the tax each year based on net imports so that China does not have an incentive to stop buying from the U.S. Although this tax will result in a small increase in the price of goods coming from China, I would rather pay $5 for an item that is made in the U.S. than pay $4 for the item that is made by children in China. Other items. We should limit the price of each prescription drug sold in the U.S. to the lowest price that same drug is sold anywhere else in the world. Some criminals should be in domestic job corps, learning job skills rather than in jail, skills that will keep them out of jail in the future. We should require any unemployed person who is offered a job they can do to accept the job or lose benefits. We should increase the standard deduction and close loopholes. We should have the educational testing service give tests on online courses.
Thank you, Mr. French.
The overall cost of all these programs to the United States is zero.
Thank you, Mr. French. Our next candidate, Mark Stewart Greenstein of Newington, Connecticut. Mr. Stewart.
Thank you. I am a lesser-known candidate who is trying to make the case to be a well-known candidate. And I think there's a good reason for the nation reporters here to pay attention. I'm a liberty-minded Democrat. You don't hear that very often. Some people call it a conservative Democrat. I'm in the space that JFK once was, but our current leaders in my party have vacated. They don't get liberty. And in their attempts to support groups, they hurt them. I make a message to every one of those groups to think how liberty actually brings you together. Students, that's one group. You heard Bernie and Hillary 2 nights ago saying what they'll do for students. It's ludicrous when you try to make something free when it should have value. 5th graders understand that. Bernie and Hillary pander as if you were 5th graders or worse. Liberty is something that actually could unite progressives and conservatives. I think it's a pretty good message. I'm a lot like Rand Paul in that way. And you'll hear this all the way to California. I'm in the primaries all the way to June. I hope I'll collect enough delegates for Philadelphia to make a difference. With some enterprising reporters here, it really might work. Students get hurt by bigger government. Women have not been advantaged despite a lot of the leaders in my party saying, oh, I'm all for women. I'm a better feminist than Hillary Clinton. Disabled people, we care for them, but the government can't care for them as well as individuals can. I try to make that message throughout the primaries. StewartForLiberty.com is a good site to look. I have more content there than Hillary and Bernie combined. Thank you.
Thank you. Henry Hughes, our next candidate from New York.
My name's Henry Hughes, and I am the pro-life Democrat running in this primary. The Democratic Party has traditionally supported and fought for those without voices and those without power. I'm troubled by illegal immigrants in this country who drive down the wages for working Americans. I'm troubled by students who are burdened with huge debts from going to college. I'm troubled by 3,000 drone attacks in foreign countries where people are assassinated. I'm troubled by Social Security and Medicare verging on bankruptcy. I'm troubled by food stamps, which have created an epidemic of diabetes in this country. I am troubled by an income tax system which penalizes labor and rewards capital. Most important, however, I am running to try to make the point for life. I stand with Lyndon Johnson, John Kennedy, Bobby Kennedy, Martin Luther King, and Jimmy Carter in being distinctly pro-life. Hillary Clinton, Bernie Sanders are both pro-abortion radicals. They stand and support abortions in the late term. They support partial birth abortions. They support abortions for population control, and they support abortions for sex selection. We have to understand that 3,500 babies died today. 25,000 babies will die this week. 100,000 babies will die this month, and over 1,300,000 will die this year. Hillary Clinton is not concerned about this. Bernie Sanders is not concerned. I'm concerned, and the great majority of Democrats are concerned. The Democratic Party is not populated by a majority of pro-abortion radicals. It's populated by a majority of good people who want to support the right to life of every citizen of the United States.
Thank you. We'll go to our second level and to Brock Hutton of Linthicum, Maryland.
Good evening. My name is Brock Hutton, and I'm running for president because we're jeopardizing our children's futures with these continued budget deficits in Washington. Currently, we have a national debt that is approaching $19 trillion, and we're poised to add almost $500 billion more to that figure in 2016. Imagine, if you will, going to the store, you buy a whole bunch of stuff, you put it on your credit card. When you get home, you take those credit card bills, you hand them to the kids, and you say, here, kids, you can pay these bills off over your lifetime. Now, you and I wouldn't do that, and the federal government needs to stop doing it too. I have a plan to fix the problem. Excluding Social Security and Medicare, which I would not cut, I would cut all other federal spending by 10%. That would reduce the deficit by about $250 billion. Additionally, I propose raising the Medicare tax, not the Social Security tax. I propose raising the Medicare tax, which is 1.45%, and I propose raising it to a rate of between 2 and 2.5%. You're only talking a 1% tax increase, yet it would raise $80 to $180 billion in additional revenues. Additionally, I propose a national entertainment tax on sports, movies, and concerts of 5 to 10%, because if you can afford entertainment, then you can certainly afford a little more tax. And finally, I want to emphasize that I believe we need to pass a constitutional amendment to enact term limits for members of Congress. They get in there, they stay there forever and do their own bidding rather than working for you and me. And as we know, democracy can only flourish when everyone can participate. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Hutton. Next is Lloyd Kelso of North Carolina.
Good evening, everybody. I'm Lloyd Kelso. I'm a trial lawyer from North Carolina. I do a lot of family law. Traditionally, I've done a lot of personal injury law over the years. I've written 6 books on family law. I also have a wife, Deborah, and I have 5 children altogether, counting the stepchildren, I guess you would say. And we have about 12 grandchildren. So we have a nice life there in Gastonia, North Carolina, and I could be out sitting by my pool, but I felt like that this summer the better alternative would be to get involved in politics and to see if I could do something about the state of America and what we can do about the problems that we have. So this election is about a lot of things. This next president is going to decide whether we're going to be at war, whether we're going to be at peace. This next president is going to decide whether the middle class is going to keep going down, spiraling to the bottom, or whether they're going to come up. This next president is going to decide whether the poor that we have in America are going to completely go under, or whether they're going to be able to rise up. I have a plan to deal with these things. I have a plan to deal with how we deal with our tax structure. I would not tax people who make less than $36,000 a year with federal income tax. I would change the cap on Social Security and reduce the amount of tax from 12.4 to 5%, and I would get rid of the cap on Social Security altogether. By making some of these changes, we could make a huge difference in the tax revenues in America. I would also like to change the way we handle veterans' health care. I would have a Medicare card for all veterans, and we would try to make sure that they get the same care as everybody else in the country. I don't think there's been much talk about veterans care tonight, but that's something that's been a big part of my policies and my campaign. And so that's just the start of kind of what I want to do, and I would like to see big changes made in America and see the middle class stop spiraling to the bottom.
Thank you, Mr. Kelso. Next is Stephen Roy Lipscomb of Santa Fe, New Mexico.
FixItAmerica.org. So many of us have started to believe that the system of government is broken and highly unlikely to be fixed in our lifetime. So many of us want to do something, but have absolutely no idea where to start. I've come across the country tonight to proclaim as loudly as I possibly can that there is something we can do. I've come here tonight to say to as many people and introduce as many people as I possibly can to the Fix It America Constitutional Amendment. And before you completely tune out and stop listening, understand that the people who profit from a broken system want you to think it's utterly impossible to amend the Constitution. But it's anything but impossible. All you need are votes. And you and I, we vote for and elect the people who cast those votes. The Fix It America Constitutional Amendment does 2 very critical, simple, but important things. Number 1, it stops selling our elections to the highest bidders. And number 2, it stops the process of gerrymandering so that we draw lines to benefit particular political parties. So number 1, stop selling our elections. Number 2, stop cheating when you draw the lines. If you go to FixItAmerica.org, you can go to your legislators today, and you can get those people to sign up to be part of the solution. And if not, you can learn how to run like I'm doing right now so that they will. I mean, think about it. Do we really think that those people went into public service believing that what they would do is find total gridlock, get absolutely nothing done, and be rewarded by spending 40% of their time raising money? I really don't think so. We hear it every election cycle. Every time they come out and tell us that Washington is broken and it needs to be fixed. But if your car is broken, doesn't matter who's driving, it ain't going anywhere.
Thank you. Our next candidate is Robert Lovett of Fort Knox, Kentucky.
Thank you, Mr. Marmanley. I appreciate that introduction. I'd like to thank the college for this event. And I would like to thank New Hampshire for allowing a non-politician like myself to be able to register to put his hat in the ring for president. My field is in technology, computers, and security. But what I wanted to let you know, a little bit of personal on family history. There's this book that we have on my mother's side of the family, and it gives a family history. And it talks about this one family member who converted to Republicanism. And thought struck me. When I registered to be a Democrat when I was 18, you could not find Republicans other than on the sample ballot, other than president, senator, and congressman. You couldn't run as a dog catcher as a Republican. But now you look at Kentucky, both of our senators are Republican. Our governor's Republican. We have one Democratic representative. What has happened? Even my mother has converted to Republicanism. So, anyway, it's good to hear that there are other Democrats here who are conservative, that are moderate. I consider myself a moderate Democrat. We need to adhere to the Constitution. We need to balance the budget. We need to secure the borders. We need to, but in all, we also need to make sure that those who can't take care of themselves are taken care of.
Thank you. Next is William McGahee, Jr. of Minneapolis, Minnesota. I hope I was pronouncing your last name right, Mr. McGahee.
It's William McGoy.
McGoy.
Minneapolis. I'm the only candidate running for president in the Democratic Party from the Midwest, and that includes a wide area. I'm doing so because I want to raise particular issues that I think are outside the political mainstream. It's very contentious, but our politics is completely polarized or largely polarized by gender and race. If you look at the election of 2012, Obama got 92%, I think, of the black vote, something like 88% of the gay, lesbian, transgender vote, somewhat less of the immigrant vote, the Hispanic immigrant vote. Generally got a majority of the female vote. Mitt Romney, I think, actually got 59% of the white vote. Something very strange is happening. I decided to run as a Democrat partly on the issue of dignity for white people. I want to have race discussed in a different way. I am married to an African American woman. But this racial division without being discussed is not going to help this country at all. I think at least I want to run so we can openly say, I'm also for a shorter work week. a 32-hour work week, which I think will help all people and defeat the...
Thank you, Mr. McGoy. We'll
Okay.
keep things moving here and move on to Raymond Michael Morose of Rensselaer, New York. And if you make sure to use your microphone there. Thank you.
Thank you. My name's Raymond Michael Morose. I'm proud union member from state of New York. And my nephew came in from San Diego, and he asked me, he said, Uncle Ray, why are you running for president? And I said, well, Brian, who is Irish, Mexican, Ukrainian, I said, Brian, there shouldn't be a war. There's no need for that. And he's, among other things, and he asked me to list some of the things for him, so I'll tell them to you. My union, probably by next week, the Supreme Court will decide Friedrichs versus California Teachers Association. That will crush the public unions, including my own. And that was one of the reasons I came here. I think there's a crisis in the middle class, and unions are being destroyed by the corporations. And New Hampshire had a proud union history, and I think that should be reversed. And also, I would like to try to get a living wage of $20 adjusted to inflation, universal health care, free college for all, 10% reallocation of the military budget for intelligence against ISIS and such, not hard Army Reserve stuff. And for gun control, I think you should create a Federal Bureau of Gun Statistics based on the Congressional Budget Office, where you can get impartial statistics gathered and then make a recommendation for gun control in the country, i.e. no .50 caliber guns in people's backyards. And for the vets, I don't think any vet should wait 1 minute. If there's a medical facility available anywhere in the country, instead of going to the VA, they can go to any hospital. Thank you.
Thank you. Our next candidate is Edward O'Donnell of Bridgeport, Pennsylvania. Mr. O'Donnell.
Yes. Look at a small child on Christmas morning. All people who have ever lived want two things: happiness and healing. The first step to that is for all of us to treat everyone with love, forgiveness, mercy, tolerance, kindness, respect, dignity, friendliness, chivalry, courtesy, and old-fashioned manners. Hal Lair, the great Colgate football coach where I went, completely turned my life around through his friendship. He did that to thousands of other people. That is our job, to turn lives around. My oldest niece, Yoko, has meekness and kindness. She's a nurse. My middle niece, Maya, has the gift of healing. You spend 1 second with her, you feel better. My youngest niece, Sally, is very good at visiting the sick. That's our job, to help other people. So we move toward Easter. Look at the thief on the cross. This is a guy who never had one moment of happiness. But in the last second, he saw the goodness in Christ, and he said, I'm sorry for what I did that was wrong. I want to love others. I want to make a difference in this world. He will be remembered down through the ages. So our job is to help people, to love people, to encourage people, and to bring the message of Christmas, I keep it going, to as many people as possible. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. O'Donnell. Our next candidate is Graham Schwartz of Haverhill, Massachusetts.
Hello, my name is Graham Schwartz from Haverhill, down in the Merrimack Valley, about 1 mile from Plastow, New Hampshire. I want to thank New Hampshire for ballot access, and I want to thank St. Anselm for this format. I've been a progressive Democrat for 30 years. I am running to promote the most important issue of our time, saving the natural world, stopping the vast extinction of species and habitat. I am doing this now because we are out of time. We are destroying God's green and blue earth. What I say is, If you do not love the earth and all living things, you love nothing, neither God nor man, nor especially not your own children. I must demand that this issue be dealt with by everybody, in particular by the Democratic Party. I have to say, if this support is not forthcoming from the Democratic Party, I'm very sorry to say, I will have no choice but to go to the Republicans. Let me say a few things on economy and social justice. I also would like to see a shorter work week. I think we all would. 35-hour week, flex time, enough vacation, sharing the profits. If we create the wealth, we should share in it. I support Black Lives Matter, and I feel that it is vital that we reform the prison system, reduce prison population by at least half, end mandatory and excessive sentencing. And I'll finish by just saying on the Syrian refugees, I don't know what, are we cowards now that we are afraid to help a few women and children that need our help? So I want to finish by saying that I think we need to kick the Republicans out of Congress as soon as possible. Thank you.
Thank you. Our next candidate is Sam Sloan of the Bronx, New York. Mr.
My name is Sam Sloan. I'm a candidate for president. I was born in America. My parents were both born in America. My 4 grandparents were all born in America, and all but 2 of my great-grandparents were born in America. We came over from Ireland to Sweden in the early or middle 1800s. 2 of my ancestors fought in the American Revolutionary War, one on my mother's side, one on my father's side. 5 of my uncles fought in World War II. One uncle was in the invasion of Iwo Jima, another uncle was in the Battle of the Bulge, another uncle was a pilot with support aircraft that dropped the A-bomb on Nagasaki. 3 of my children, I have 8 children and 5 grandchildren. 3 of my children are in the U.S. military now. I have one daughter who served 4 years in the war in Iraq as a U.S. Marine. Another son is in the U.S. Marines, and a 3rd son is in the Army, just got back. My son in the U.S. Marines is getting ready to go to Iraq now, except if I'm elected president, he will not be going to Iraq because all our troops will be brought back. There will be no troops sending overseas. We will stop dropping bombs in Iraq, Iran, Syria, and all these other countries in the world we keep dropping bombs on. We will withdraw all our force from all these wars that are going on all over the world, and we will not pay any other countries to fight wars either. Those countries got to defend themselves with their own money. We're not going to be involved in all these wars all around the world, especially in the Middle East. The Republicans, they want to drop bombs in Iran, Iraq, Syria, and Afghanistan, and they want to start a whole bunch of new wars. There's even one Republican candidate who wants to start a war with Russia, if you've been paying attention to what's going on in the other side of the party. But another question is adoptee rights. 6 million Americans have been adopted. I'm an expert on finding the birth parents of these people who've been adopted. Every day I find more parents, children who've been given away for adoption. As long as they're over 21 years old, I can find the parents and I can find the children. And this is one of my hobbies, but there should be a law that anybody over the age of 21 should have a right to their own birth certificate, because if they've been adopted and don't have the right to their own birth certificate. Anybody who can drive a car legally should be allowed to have a driver's license. And I have a lot more things to say, but I guess I'm out of time.
Thank you, Mr. Sloan. We have another New Yorker as our next candidate, Edward Sonino of New York.
Thank you. Hello, my name is Edward Sonino. I'm an economic forecaster and portfolio manager, born and raised in New York. We need presidents with specific, detailed, clearly workable solutions for our economic, social, and foreign policy problems, not vague platforms and empty slogans and promises, which has generally been the case. And that's why we never solve our problems. You can see the detailed solutions I propose on my website, edwardsonino.com. My main economic policy reform is revolutionary. It would make QE finance tax rebates the standard tool for economic stimulus. That would allow us to always prevent recessions and high unemployment in the future, while maximizing economic growth. This is how it would work. Whenever the real unemployment rate, which includes discouraged workers and part-time workers seeking full-time jobs, when that rate rises above 4%, the President, together with the Federal Reserve and the Congress, would determine how big a tax rebate would be required to quickly get the economy growing and the real unemployment rate back down to 4%, which is more or less full employment. Today, with the real unemployment rate around 7%, we need a QE finance tax rebate of about $2,000 for each and every taxpayer. QE, by the way, means the tax rebate is financed by the Federal Reserve, not by new government debt. For perspective, the 2009 $800 billion Obama stimulus program was the equivalent of a $5,000 tax rebate for each and every taxpayer, or $10,000 for a family of 2 taxpayers. Over the past few years, we have had $3 trillion of QE, but it was not the right type of QE since it was mainly used to benefit the banks. What was needed instead back in 2009 was a $5,000 QE finance tax rebate for each and every American taxpayer. Thank you.
Thank you. Our next candidate is Michael Steinberg of Tampa, Florida. Mr. Steinberg.
Thank you. My name is Michael Steinberg. I'm 56 years old and the owner of a medium-sized Social Security and Veterans Disability law firm in Tampa. I'm a member of the National Organization of Social Security Claimants Representatives, the National Organization of Veterans Advocates, past chair of the Hillsborough County, Florida Democratic Executive Committee, and I'm currently a member of the Hillsborough County, Florida Healthcare Advisory Board. I've been practicing law for 33 years. I've given lectures at Social Security and Veterans law conferences throughout the country. Over 50% of our budget involves payments for Social Security, SSI, Medicaid, Medicare, and veterans benefits. We need someone who has an expertise in these areas. And I don't mean somebody who sits on a veterans committee and hears from bureaucrats bragging about how well their agency is doing. The Social Security Trust Fund is facing insolvency. You kids here, in 20 years from now, the Social Security Administration is not going to be able to pay you the benefits they promised you. You're going to get 70 cents on the dollar unless changes are made. And the Disability Trust Fund would have been bankrupt this year, except for a stopgap measure that was passed earlier in 2015, extending the solvency for a few more years. But that's in trouble. People who are applying for Social Security disability benefits are waiting years to get their hearings, and the veterans are in worse shape. And we still have millions of people who do not have health care. I've been handling thousands of Social Security and veterans disability cases over the past 33 years. The job of the president is to make sure that the government agencies do their job, and I will make sure that the government agencies serve the people in a fair, prompt, and courteous manner, efficiently, and on budget. Thank you.
Thank you. And our last candidate for the opening statement is Richard Lyons-Weil of Fort Collins, Colorado.
Good evening. I'm Richard Lyons-Weil, and I'm running for president. As we all know, Washington, D.C. is completely frozen and nothing could be accomplished. If this was your computer, you would reboot. I propose we reboot America. In 1980, when Ronald Reagan began the massive tax cuts for the wealthy, tax rates were cut from 70% to approximately 30%. This started the country on a course where income inequality became a major problem. For a taxpayer making $10 million a year, this meant that his income went from $3 million to $7 million. This $4 million came directly out of the U.S. Treasury, which then took money away for goods and services that we need for the people of our country. This is the cause for our deficit. I propose that we raise the tax rates to the top tax rates to 70% on incomes above $3 million. These funds could then be used to fund the education for our citizens, to help fund the health care for our citizens. We then need to raise the minimum wage to $22 an hour and index it to inflation. This brings it down back to 1960s levels, where people could live as a subsistence level, which is the least amount of money necessary to survive. I also propose that we take the income ceilings off of Social Security tax. Presently, most Americans who make under $118,000 a year pay Social Security on 100% of their incomes. Let's take the caps off and allow the millionaires and the billionaires, who basically pay 0% of their income in Social Security, to pay the same amount of Social Security tax as all other Americans. This would allow Social Security to be solvent for 75 years. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Weil. That does it for our opening statements. Now we're going to open it up to some questions. As I mentioned before, as far as housekeeping goes, we have a much bigger field of candidates here on the Democratic side than we did on the Republican side. So we're going to do our best to keep it fair and give all of you a chance to answer questions as possible. We're going to ask some of you individual questions and some to the group. Why don't we open it up with John DeStaso? You have a chance to ask the question first.
Okay. One thing that wasn't addressed, and I'll direct this, I guess, just randomly to Mr. Ebel, because he's right in front of me, was the first job of president is to be commander-in-chief. And there wasn't a whole lot of talk about national security. I'd like to know, I know you praised President Obama. Are there any areas where you, at what point would you commit American troops to the Middle East? What would have to happen for you to do that? Is there anything that you can foresee doing that? And then perhaps we can get some other views from some of the other candidates.
A very good question. Basically, we have been bombing Islamic countries for 15 years now. And the Islamic world is starting to identify with the people who are being bombed. But that means it's like there's a 9/11 every week happening somewhere in the Islamic world. Our bombs are very effective, and they destroy cities that have been around for 1,000 years. We don't need to be in the Middle East. President Bush brought this country down to its knees economically and militarily with wars that we did not need. And President Obama has a long-term vision of extracting us from those wars. And right now we need to acknowledge the fact that the Republicans and a number of forces have been building the momentum for some years for war with Iran. I have simulation gamed the war with Iran 12 times. And it doesn't turn out very well for us. And we need to be very thankful to President Obama for what he has courageously done is avoided another war with Iran. And I think that's really important, is that we get out of the Middle East, and we can prevail by redrawing these nation states in a way that don't require us to get involved.
Thank you, Mr. Elbert.
Thank you.
Mr. O'Donnell.
Yes. What I propose is a new foreign policy. Gandhi said the goal of his life was to wipe every tear from every eye. And I propose a foreign policy by which we focus almost 100% of our efforts on feeding, clothing, housing, employing the third world poor. No wars, no spying on people, and having our embassies help the poorest of the poor rather than focusing on helping wealthy corporations and wealthy tourists. So a new foreign policy to help people all over the world.
Mr. Hughes.
Yeah, if President Obama has done such a great job, why do we still have soldiers in Afghanistan? Why are the bombs still falling on several countries, Somalia, Yemen? This is not success. This is not commitment to extracting us from hopeless, senseless, windless war, which is what we have experienced now, not only for 8 years under George Bush, but for 8 long years under President Barack Obama. We are still sending drones to assassinate people in their houses, and it is unbelievable to me that when Barack Obama ran, that this was the legacy that he would leave. We need to repudiate that, and we need to make a decision that we are not going to assassinate people abroad, that we're not going to bomb their cities, and that no crusader army from the United States is ever going to solve the problems of the Middle East.
Mr. Stewart?
I want to echo both Henry and Eric. We don't understand the Middle East, so let's not even attempt to try and fix it, especially when lives are on the line. We don't understand people who will blow themselves up for Allah. That's not an American thing. We're not going to be able to understand and nation build. The people in the Middle East, many of them have been fighting Sunni versus Shia for something that started 1,400 years ago because one sect thinks that Muhammad bequeathed a descendancy to one relative instead of the other, And I think there's one other difference, that they will self-flagellate on Muharram. We can't understand why they'd be fighting life and death for this. Don't try to get into wars that we can't fix even if we win.
Mr. Kelso, I saw your hand.
I think we first have to realize just who we're fighting here, and that is that we are fighting Islamic extremists who want to kill all of us. They want to kill everyone who is opposed to their viewpoint about Allah being their God, and that the end of the world is going to come through their jihadist movement. And if you are sitting here tonight and you're not in fear of ISIS, then you need to be rethinking where you are. These folks want to kill everyone in the Middle East. They want to kill everyone in this room. And we're going to have to do something about going to the Middle East. Now, I'm not going to tell you exactly what I'm going to do. I'm kind of like a football coach here. I don't know. I may run, I may pass. But I'm going to go over there and I'm going to knock them out. And ISIS will not be a problem in the second and third year of my term. I promise you.
Mr. Sunino. Sounds like Donald Trump.
Thank you.
All the nations which are starting wars or are violence-ridden are countries which do not respect human rights, and I think that's, and democracy, but especially human rights. And we have to remember that every member nation of the United Nations has undersigned the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. And somehow, we don't have the United Nations enforce that Universal Declaration. If we put the emphasis on nations respecting human rights and enforcing them, and if they don't, they have to be kicked out of the United Nations, or we have to create a new United Nations only of nations which respect and enforce human rights. It's very cynical to have a United Nations and have all the member nations undersign the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, and the great majority of them do not. So to get down to the bottom of all this violence in the world, we need to enforce human rights.
Continuing on this topic, Mr. Adams, you mentioned in your opening statement that you, as president, would want to work with Russia more to help resolve this situation and to defeat the Islamic State. As you probably know, we are currently at odds with Russia in terms of what to do with Bashar al-Assad, the Syrian president. How would you resolve that issue in terms of the Syrian civil war? And should Assad step down? Should Assad go immediately?
Thanks, Mike. He should, but my problem with our current foreign policy is that we're prioritizing the protections of the citizens of Syria or Libya over American interests. So I think it's a very important thing you raised. Our number one priority, and actually Bernie Sanders just came around to this just 2 nights ago in their debate, our number one priority has to be protecting our citizens. It has to be destroying ISIS. Russia is not the Soviet Union. They're not communist. They're not trying to spread communism or socialism around. They're kind of a democratic oligarchy. They're not a threat like they were in the 70s or 80s trying to spread communism around. So I think it's misguided to try to focus a foreign policy on deposing another dictator because you don't know what he's doing to his own people, you don't like what he's doing to his own people. We have to prioritize our safety, our security. We have to get rid of ISIS. And to touch briefly on the other question, I would be very, very sparing in using ground forces. I wouldn't completely rule it out because sometimes you got to go to war when you're attacked.
Why don't we get a show of hands here from the panel? Is there anybody on this stage who would send American troops into the Middle East to help defeat the Islamic State?
Who would or wouldn't?
Would send in ground troops.
Who would?
Yes.
It's a question of how much and what time.
And how it's done.
Well, I wouldn't rule it out.
Right. Excuse me. What's your time frame? Because isn't time frame very important here? I would not send in ground troops right now. In the end, the Islamic states, the Arab states, they have to address these issues themselves. You've got a civil war going on among these people, among themselves, that we've been drug into over the years. So right now, I wouldn't do it. But I would never, as president, take any option off the table. So your question, I wanted to clarify that.
Okay, we're going to move on to some more topics. Brad, why don't we go to Mr. McGoy?
I think we need to take a defensive posture against ISIS. In the United States, that means watching mosques. That means watching the internet and Facebook and seeing what's going on, seeing where people are radicalized. We need to watch it not by having humans looking at conversations going on, but by having computers go through a wide variety of conversations and looking for words having to do with attack and jihad and that nature.
Thanks,
In the
Mr.
Middle
French.
East-
We do want to try to give everyone an opportunity, so we're going to make sure we call on everyone individually. And so, Brad, we'll pose the next question to Mr. McGoy.
Thank you. Mr. McGoy, several strong opinions here already about the Middle East. I think I even heard the name Trump. Should the U.S. be accepting refugees from Syria and from other conflicts in predominantly Muslim nations?
Well, under some circumstances, I think yes, but that should be very much the second choice. I think the key to it is that we supported dissidents or insurgents against the government in Syria because we had kind of a romantic notion of the Arab Spring and we were going to bring democracy and so forth. That hasn't worked out at all. I think we have to try to bring the Assad government together with some of the radicals that have been fighting it, but we do have to defeat ISIS. I think that's a new threat that needs to be addressed, but only after there's a moderated solution in Syria itself and an attempt to bring the Russians and some others into Syria to defeat ISIS. So that's my opinion.
My focus group showed that by globalizing the war on terror and further globalizing it by this war on ISIS, the result will be, one, that Muslim people radicalized through the internet all over the world, and there are Muslims everywhere, are going to start taking on this personalized cause, and it will have the result of Americans on the streets of the cities of the world being stabbed. And very quickly, that will end American preeminence in the world because we can't get out there. Two, it will put in danger the whole concept of globalization. And three, it may even put in danger the whole concept of modernity because we will foster a struggle between fundamentalism and modernity. And we're thinking these immediate results, like we're going to carpet bomb to win the next election. What we have to do is project out 15 years. We don't want the Islamic war to consume the 21st century the way Nazism and communism consumed the 20th century. And we're driving that. We're driving that. And the military-industrial complex is heavily invested in growing that.
Let's hear from one of the candidates who haven't had a chance to answer yet. Mr. De La Fuente, do you want to weigh in on this topic?
More than happy. First and foremost, you have to know when you're playing your A game, your B game, or your C game. You need to understand who the opponent is. And you cannot telegraph your moves. You cannot tell a chess player what you're going to move 5 moves before. Now, as commander-in-chief, you control the army, the navy, and the militia in certain states. And the question becomes is, what do you tell the people? Do you telegraph your moves? The answer is no, you don't. You have to keep it close to your vest. They have to know how to basically, they have to understand they cannot be able to predict you, but they need to understand that you mean business. Thank you.
Thank you. John, why don't we have the next question for Mr. Levitt?
Mr. Levitt, you've covered a lot of ground in your opening statement, but I'd like to know, let's hone in on a question that the so-called major candidates are asked a lot. Day one in office, what's the first step you take? What's the biggest priority out of all the priorities that you've named that need to be addressed, and how would you do it?
My highest priority is security, and as I mentioned in my opening statement, my field deals a lot with security. That's not to diminish all of the other problems that we face, like drug addiction and unemployment and underemployment. The first day, I'm going to have to get a thorough briefing of what the situation is in the world. and the details on our security. Any specifics that you want to know about that?
Absolutely. To the degree you'd like to talk about them, go right ahead.
Well, the thing is that you don't want to say too much about what you're going to do to your adversary, because they can work against that. And I've always, since I was a young child, thought strategically.
Thank you, Mr. Levitt. Mr. Wow, why don't you hear you on the same question? What would you do on your first day in office?
My first day in office, I would implement plans to try and raise the minimum wage to a subsistence level. The most important thing we can do is end poverty in this country. I would put forces together to try and put together a program like the Works Progress Administration to increase our infrastructure spending, our spending on education. If we can raise the wage to a level as well as create much more demand for workers, those two things will automatically raise all wages in America. So that would be the first thing I would do. The second thing I would try and do is use diplomacy to solve our problems in the Middle East. Throughout history, wars have all been ended through a negotiated process. At this stage of the development of the civilized world, to fight wars anymore should be ended.
Mr. Wallace suggested a $22 an hour minimum wage. Is there anybody else on this dais here who would support a minimum wage at that level?
I would like to answer if I could.
I'd also like it indexed to inflation, because if it's not indexed to inflation every day, Americans lose wages.
Mr. O'Donnell, I saw your hand. Why don't you hear why you think that we should have a minimum wage of $22 an hour?
Well, can I just do a related issue?
Sure.
The first thing I would do, there's $800 billion in the bank accounts of our nation's charities. You have millionaires and billionaires say they want to save America. You have school kids who would send in their pennies. You take most of that money, you hire every unemployed person, every homeless person, every prisoner, former prisoner, disabled, escorts, guaranteed job, passing out literature for small businesses. They have no customers and no money for advertising. Picking up litter, there's money in those recyclables. We create these shovel-ready jobs for the unemployed. The free market will not hire these massive numbers of unemployed. The unemployment rate is 3 times what the government is telling you.
Mr. De La Fuente, you had raised your hand.
Yes, I believe that minimum wage should be a minimum of $14. But more importantly, why did I raise my hand at 22? Because I believe there should be more than one minimum wage. It's not the same for the bottom of our social structure. What about the mechanic, the auto mechanic, the aircraft mechanic? What about the talent? I think we need to have 4 different types of minimum wage, or depending on their skill levels, like they do other countries. We do not need to reinvent all the new rules. Just take a look at what happens in other countries. And based on what happens in other countries, then you can apply it. So the answer is, we should tell labor, we should tell the unions, we should tell our factories, we should tell the people what to expect within basically my first 4 years of government, or if they had re-elected me.
The next question will be for Mr. Steinberg. And Brett, why don't you ask?
Mr. Steinberg, does this country have a problem with police brutality? And if so, what would you do about it?
You know, there are good cops and there are bad cops. There are good attorneys and there are bad attorneys. And there are good doctors and there are bad doctors. And I think overall, most police officers are good police officers. However, when a police officer does something bad, I think that it's hard for the police agency for whom he works to decide, to regulate them. I think that the Attorney General, the U.S. Attorney, needs to get involved and investigate police brutality that occurs on a local level. I like the idea of citizen review boards that are made up of non-police officers to evaluate whether there's a violation of someone's civil rights. So I think on a whole, I think police officers are doing a pretty good job, but you see these isolated incidents, and that's what really makes the news.
Mr. Schwartz, you had mentioned Black Lives Matter, that you were supporting of that movement in your opening statement. What would you do as president to help address this issue of mistrust between law enforcement and communities of color?
Yes, I do support Black Lives Matter. I also support the local police, but there seems to be real problems with the police in terms of attitude of some police. The code of silence, the defensiveness among police about this issue that needs to be addressed. I think the police, we need to talk about a lot of much better training for police and how to deal with these crisis situations. And police, if there's a problem, if somebody does something wrong, others in the organization need to point that out, need to come forward. There can't be a code of silence. But we need to try to work some kind of understanding between all the parties involved. I think the police often try to do great work with people and keep them out of jail. We need to have a new criminal justice system where we're reducing the vast numbers of people in jail.
Next question will be for Mr. Lipscomb from John.
Okay. Mr. Lipscomb, I'd like to know, this week is the anniversary of the Roe v. Wade decision. And I'd like to get a discussion going here possibly about what restrictions you feel should be put on, if any, on abortion, and whether if you, as in a nominating Supreme Court justice, would use that issue as what's known, perhaps not so nicely, as a so-called litmus test.
Softball question, abortion, that's all you've got? You know, I think the first day in office, what I would do is I would immediately get the FBI and ask how a one-state strategy won the presidency. On abortion, I think it fits very squarely in what I call the pyramid of shame, with the $17 trillion debt sitting at the top and all of the big issues that we care about and spend every day thinking something's going to be considered in our government. It doesn't happen. Essentially, while we spend all of our time in government trying to pit one side against the other and finding a way to dislike each other, nothing gets considered, nothing gets done. And I think abortion sits squarely in the middle of one of those things that essentially will never be considered, much less have anything move forward in Congress, which are the people who would have to move first the presidency anyway. When it comes to appointing Supreme Court justices, I sit on the Democratic side, so certainly would appoint someone who believed in a woman's right to choose. But that's why the fixitamerica.org constitutional amendment matters. You've got to fix the government so it can work.
Mr. Kelso, I saw your hand.
I have a master's degree in divinity, and I'm a pro-life Democrat myself, but I would not take away a woman's right to choose in that situation. I think Roe v. Wade was a pretty well-reasoned decision. I don't think after the first trimester, though, Roe v. Wade doesn't support abortion after the first trimester. So I think that the interesting thing is how the Republicans have used this issue over the years. And we've had 24, 25 years of Republican presidents, and what has any of them done since Roe v. Wade was passed? What have any of those presidents done to change Roe v. Wade? They will not. They just use it as an issue to attract evangelical Christian votes. And so we've got to get to a point where we are not using that issue as a litmus test. I would not use it as a litmus test for judges.
Mr. Hughes, you called yourself a pro-life Democrat?
I am the only pro-life Democrat in this race, and I don't know of anybody else.
I just said I was, too.
Well, I don't know of anybody else who considers himself pro-life who believes that Roe versus Wade was well-reasoned. We are living in a country where abortions take place day after day after day, and just refer back to what the gentleman before said, Roe versus Wade has in fact paved the way for second trimester abortions and third trimester abortions. And we live in a country where a fully viable child can be taken from its mother's womb, except for the head, and then a surgeon can go in and suction out the brain. And in certain states in the United States, under the Roe versus Wade concept, that's legal. I'm pro-life. Nobody who thinks that Roe versus Wade was well-reasoned is pro-life.
Mr. French.
Most Republicans would qualify themselves as pro-life, and most Democrats would call themselves in favor of women's rights. But I think nobody in this room would say abortion is a wonderful procedure. What we need to do is to make sure that women don't get pregnant in the first place. And there are a lot of women who do get pregnant because they cannot afford birth control. So one of the things we should make available is free birth control to anyone who cannot afford it. We should also have developed a birth control for men so that they can avoid making babies. I think you start it at the beginning before the problem comes up, where you avoid the decision totally about having an abortion by having good birth control.
We just saw a debate in Washington about whether or not the federal government should be giving money to Planned Parenthood. Is there anybody here on this dais who would side with the Republicans who wanted to defund, as they put it, Planned Parenthood? Mr. Sloan, why don't you explain why?
I do have something to say about the issue. I have 8 children that were born. I also have 4 children that were aborted. So naturally I have a certain special issue on this particular thing about my 4 children that were aborted by Planned Parenthood, exactly.
Mr. Sonino?
I'm against the principle of abortion because I think human life is sacred, not for religious reasons, but just humanistic reasons. But I would put the emphasis on encouraging adoption. There are so many people who want to adopt children, and so if we facilitated that, could be an alternative to abortion. And the second, and as a prevention, I think most unwanted pregnancies are had by young, relatively uneducated women, and fathered by relatively uneducated men, young men. So the real solution is to really make sure that all our boys and girls get a truly good education, because if their focus is on learning and going to university and having a professional career, they will not end up with an unwanted pregnancy.
Ms. Morose, we haven't heard from you in a while. The next question will be for you, from Brad.
Mr. Morose, as several people have mentioned already, a big concern among Americans is the federal deficit. You're a union member, but do some government programs or government benefits have to go if we're going to get the nation's balance sheets in order?
What benefits what benefits are you talking about?
Whether retirement benefits, healthcare benefits?
No, the benefits that are in place, they should stay in place. Nothing should be cut. Anything should be cut is the military budget. You're wasting it. 10% of it, we're still using it to fight the Cold War. There's no Cold War anymore. It's ridiculous. The benefits that were in place should not be cut. Social Security, retirement, I don't see the need to cut any of those benefits.
Would you be in favor of raising the retirement age if that is what's driving costs?
No, I would not.
Mr. Stewart?
Brad, we have to cut them. It's immoral not to, because if you keep pensions going at this rate, it's grandchildren who are suffering. They can't pay off the kind of pension debt that elders have incurred. We intended pensions to help retirees whose life expectancy then was 67, 2 years after retirement. Well, now if you're retiring at 62 and living to 95, and you're expecting younger generations to take care of you, it doesn't work. The numbers don't come close to adding up, and it is an immoral act for a government to take money from generations unborn that can't vote in favor of or against. I am a Democrat in favor of radically reducing government spending across the board except the military, environment, and courts.
Mr. Hutton, you had raised this issue in your opening statement.
As I mentioned previously, I do favor...
And if you could make sure, again, to have the microphones.
As I mentioned previously, I do favor an increase in the Medicare tax. I would suggest 1%. But Social Security, you don't have to raise the tax. If you raise the retirement age to 70, and probably phasing that in would be the best approach, And if for the cost of living increases, you used a different formula, which is commonly known as the Consumer Price Index minus 1%, which most people really believe that have studied this issue better tracks the actual inflation. You can bring Social Security into solvency. So I don't think we need to increase the tax for Social Security, and I would not cut Social Security benefits because our elderly depend on them so much. But the Medicare tax I'd raise.
Well, actually, you know, the problem is not as great as people think. If we would simply raise the age for Medicare and Social Security eligibility by 3 months every year, we would solve our basic problems with Medicare and Social Security. And if you went out among people in America, even people nearing the retirement wage, and you told them that the price of saving the program for future generations was a 3-month increase in the minimum wage for Social Security and Medicare, they would be the first ones to tell you, do it.
We'll have the, Mr. Schwartz, why don't you win?
Yeah, you know, everybody says it's about we don't have enough money. That's not the issue. We do have the money. We do have the wealth. We need a full employment economy. We can pay for the things that we need. Social Security, pension system. Europe does it. Democracy does it. It's really not a question of we don't have the money. We're the richest country in the world. Problem is the 1%, if you will, or the 20% are hoarding the wealth. We can pay for these things. We don't have to take a back seat on these issues. We can take care of our own people.
Mr. Albert, I'll pose the next question to you. You talked about the focus groups that you had done in Indonesia, I believe it is.
Yes.
The president is going to be pushing Congress to pass the Trans-Pacific Partnership, a major trade deal with the Pacific Rim countries that the United States would belong to. What's your position on that trade bill? Would you support it?
As we're being consumed in the Middle East, we're ignoring where our real vital interests lie in the Pacific. China is the ascending empire as we're the descending empire. The president's trade deal is a strategic move to reassert our preeminence in the Pacific Basin. China wishes to dominate the Pacific Basin. It's not looking for the world yet. And this is our way of creating a set of allies that are cooperating in liberating the Pacific, basically, from the growing Chinese influence. Yes, I support it. It could have, it can be built on in the future, but it is the kind of strategic move that has long-term implications that the president is wisely pursuing. Yes.
Mr. Moroz, a number of unions are among the staunchest critics of this trade bill. What do you think of the trade deal, and what are your concerns about what its impact would be on American workers?
Yeah, it would devastate American workers. If you go to the AFL-CIO website, Trump has come out against the TPP, I believe they call it. It would just take tens of thousands of jobs away from Americans. And I'm against it. I don't see any reason to sign that. Any unionized worker that would lose his job because of that, it's not worth it.
Are there any trade deals, or would you consider yourself a free trader?
No.
Okay, John, the next question will be for you, and it'll be for Mr. Adams in the front here.
Okay. Mr. Adams, I brought this up earlier, and I'd like to hear it from the Democratic side. What is the main, I mean, you are here, and we are happy to have you here in this forum, but what has to happen in this country to allow someone like yourself to get on the so-called main stage? What kind of reform needs to be done in our election system? Do we need to, for instance, have public financing, just throwing that out as a possibility? Are there some other options that you would see where truly the average person can get to the level where Hillary Clinton and Bernie Sanders are today?
Thanks for the question, John. I do think we have to have campaign finance reform. We have to level the playing field a little bit more. But New Hampshire really plays a critical role in allowing lesser-known candidates to express their views. There's no reason at all that any one or two of the candidates that are at the tables right now couldn't jump into the top tier and become a top candidate. So although we do need campaign finance reform, we have to level the playing field. Citizens United is not a good thing for democracy. We don't want to have our entire government for sale. So that's my opinion on that. To answer the other question, well, I've got 25 more seconds. On my first day in the White House, I would cut student loan interest rates in half across the board. You can't, with our national debt, you can't give everybody free college, but you can cut interest rates. You can help people any way you possibly can in a way that makes sense.
Mr. Sloan, we haven't heard from you in a while. What would be your answer to John's question about what would propel you into the top tier, as it were?
Well, I think that, actually, by the way, I have to be a very well-known person in certain field, the game of chess. Every tournament chess player in the United States knows my name. I'm like synonymous with the game of chess. I'm very controversial, it's true, in the game of chess. I'm also a top player in Chinese chess. I'm one of the best players in the world in Chinese chess and a former master of international chess. And I also play Thai chess and Japanese chess too at the world championship level. So I'm at championship level in 4 games. Everybody in the world who plays these games knows my name. And if I could get into a debate with Hillary, I'm sure I could beat her because even though she's a great candidate and she will be the next president, Hillary is going to be elected. This is a fact. But we just have to face reality. But if I could actually get into a debate against her, I think I could win, and I think I could win the election. But that's not going to happen, I don't think. But we can hope for a miracle.
Mr. Lipscomb.
We spent a year prior to this Fix It America thing trying to get something on television called Born to Run. I started the poker craze, so my claim to fame is that I put poker on television, and it's now an international phenomenon. So we went as sort of the next big foray into something called Born to Run, and if you go to born2.com, you'll see the pitch reel. We got that close to selling it. And you would have had 2 people in the primary here basically having done The Apprentice of, or the American Idol of politics. In the New Hampshire primary, there would have been 1 Democrat and 1 Republican that would have been brought by television audience to the forefront. And the reason I offer that up in support is, candidly, when you look at the log jams that sit in the system and make it so hard to get in, I'm mighty impressed some candidates are on 30 ballots. Something like that is going to happen. It's going to be a disruptor that has nothing to do with the system that you see, and it will change it for good. That one's not done. We still have it in the hopper.
Mr. French.
One of the things that I've learned in the last couple of months is how expensive it is to get on the ballot in each of the 50 states. New Hampshire charges $1,000, which is very reasonable. I understand Georgia is free, but everyone else is more expensive. You have signature requirements, so to run on the ballot in all of the states probably costs at least $1 million, which most of us don't have for that purpose.
Just one more thing, which is that the real problem for all of us is that we do not get the media exposure. There's something called the Communications Act of 1934, which actually requires all of the broadcast media to provide equal access to all of the candidates with some very specific exceptions. But with all due respect to the people from WMUR, if you categorize the number of minutes that Hillary Clinton appears on WMUR and you characterize the number of minutes that all of us appear together, she would vastly outweigh it. So if that Communications Act was actually enforced and particularly the broadcast media was required to provide access to everyone who is on the ballot, not equal for everybody, but reasonable access, that would go a long way toward broadening the process, not only in New Hampshire, but in every state in the union.
I want to give Mr. Levitt a chance to have a question here as well. What would you say to John's question about how you would get into the top tier?
Media access would be the answer. If we would have that opportunity to speak on national TV, on the regular broadcasts, if it was just 2 minutes, we would get a better opportunity for people to know who we are. The other thing, once again, New Hampshire has an excellent way of doing this, and the $1,000 fee is reasonable. So that means for like $50,000 if you did it for all 50 states, you know, but some states are incredibly far beyond that. So it becomes very difficult to mount any kind of effective campaign over the entire nation.
I want to go back to Mr. Steinberg here.
You know, nobody here has more on the ballot more than 4 or 5 different states except for Mr. De La Fuente. If you really want to shake things up, every single one of us says, we support Rocky De La Fuente, and I don't even know the guy, but I do know he's a multimillionaire. He has property in many different states. He can afford to run a campaign, and if we say we support Rocky De La Fuente, I think we're going to shake things up. And he's on the ballot in Ohio, Martin O'Malley isn't. And I think that's what it's going to take as an outsider. You know, when Ross Perot ran in 1992, he shook things up. And maybe that's what it takes, is for all of us to say, let's take one of us who is on the ballot in 30 states and maybe going to be on the ballot in 50 states, and let's support him. And maybe he'll take all of our ideas and we'll work as a team and we'll be the lesser known candidates for president.
Let's have another question for Mr. Hutton and from Brad.
Mr. Hutton. Mr. Hutton, thank you. We're talking about access right now, and I can't help but notice that there's all men on stage tonight. So what will you do to make sure that all Americans are included in the political process?
Yes, I noticed that as well, and it's also an issue now with the Academy Awards getting a little more play there and everything else. The important thing in our political system is that we try to be as open as possible and encourage people. Right now, what you have is a setup that discourages people, one, because of money. I mean, we've mentioned a few names about people running, Donald Trump and Ross Perot, but they had millions of dollars. None of us have that, or most of us don't have anything like that. I think we have to look and ask and go out and seek people to join. How about all the people, the kids involved in student government, getting them involved? You have lots of boys and girls involved in that. How about getting all of the state senators, state delegates, and ask them who, and invite them to the party? That's the kind of effort we need to make. We need to make an outreach effort that includes everybody, and I think we'll all feel better about it.
Mr. Weil.
Yes, sir.
Oh, I thought you had your hand up that you wanted to address this question as well.
You went on to another subject.
Okay. If you want to weigh in on the question that John had asked, then I'll welcome you to do that.
What was the question again?
How about I pose a new question to you then?
Go ahead.
Let's look at the issue of illegal immigration. Today, the Supreme Court said it would take up the constitutionality of President Obama's Deferred Action Program for the parents of immigrants. This is the program that would go up beyond the so-called Dreamers. If the Supreme Court were to strike down that program, what would you do as president to help address the status of the parents of so-called Dreamers, and on the issue more broadly of illegal immigration?
Well, I'm very much in favor of immigration. It's been the backbone of our society since the formation of this country. It's been very trying to watch Mr. Trump make fun of Mexicans, violate our Constitution by saying he's going to discriminate against Muslims and not let them in. It's probably the saddest chapter in our country that this is going on. What I would try and do is elicit the support of Congress and pass legislation that will reform our immigration system and make it such that this country opens its arms to immigrants that has made us strong. The facts are that immigrants are model citizens, and the rhetoric that we have heard from Mr. Trump is probably the blackest mark in this country in a long, long time. Being a Jewish man, it is very distressing to me when you start with Mexicans and you go to Muslims. Historically, it all comes back down. To think that any one group is better than another is just a crime.
Thank you, Mr. Weil. Mr. De La Fuente, you're from San Diego, very near the border. How would you address this issue of illegal immigration?
Well, first of all, you need to understand the bigger issue. The Mexican border, American border is 1,954 miles long. That's the year I was born. 3,344 kilometers long. And then if you take a look at that issue, the Canadian-U.S. border is twice as big. Now what happens to Alaska? What happens to the Pacific coast? What happens to Florida? What happens to the Atlantic coast? Are we going to put a wall, 100%? Are we going to create the Chinese wall all over again? It didn't work in China. The Berlin Wall did not work in Berlin. So we need to take a look at a logical thing that will work. The Chinese wall had a problem. I don't know if you've been to the Chinese wall. I've been. Well, guess what? You know what? How weak is the Chinese wall? As its weakest link. They were not able to put the wall in the middle of the river. If you put it in the river, it becomes a dam. So if you wanted to attack China, you just come in by boat through the river. Thank you.
Mr. Sonino, we haven't heard from you in a while. What would you do on this issue of illegal immigration?
I think that one thing that really strikes me is immigration of people who don't embrace our values. I don't understand why any person would want to immigrate into the United States if they did not love our values and share our values. And so I would not allow any foreigner to immigrate to the United States unless it were very clear that they embraced our values, specifically human rights and women's equal rights, and non-discrimination on the basis of religion. I think that's very important. We should really make this a public matter, that it's not acceptable for anybody to immigrate to the United States unless they embrace our values.
Let's have another question from Mr. McGoy, unless you want to answer this one. Yeah.
Well, I do. I think the problem is the relationship between the supply of productive labor and the goal that is accomplished. What we're neglecting is the influence of productivity gains on this process. Between the 1930s and today, labor productivity has increased 4 times. This has had a strange effect upon the economy because the agricultural produce, mainstream manufacturing production can be handled much more easily now than before. What we've had is creative ways of utilizing the excess labor capacity that have not been helpful in the healthcare industry, in criminal justice, and so forth. We engage in a lot of enterprises now that are not necessary. We have to somehow get productivity and production back into sync.
Last one on this topic from Mr. Sloan.
Yes, I live in an immigrant neighborhood, the Morris Heights section of the Bronx. I'm the only person on my street who was actually born in the USA, in that county, Puerto Rico. I speak about 15 languages. Yo puedo hablar español muy bien. I live with immigrants all the time. Most of the people in my building are from Africa, like Nigeria, Burkina Faso. A guy down the street, 5 blocks down the street, you know what happened to him? The police thought he was a mistake, by mistake, thought he was a burglar or something like that, so they shot him 17 times. And that's my issue on black rights. The poor guy's name is Amador Diallo. He lived 5 blocks down the street from me. And unfortunately, what Obama did is
41.
We just simply cannot open our doors to everybody to come here. And we've got to have some control over the borders, even though the people in my neighborhood predominantly did come here illegally, I think. But nevertheless, and they're here, and good citizens, no problem with them at all. I never had any trouble myself. But we just can't open the borders to all these people.
All right, before we move on to the next topic, let's do another quick show of hands question. If President Obama could run constitutionally for a 3rd term as president, would you support him? Raise your hand if you would support President Obama for a 3rd term. Some of those who haven't raised your hand, Mr. Lipscomb, why not?
I just think 2 terms is good. He's great, but I think 2 terms is fine for anybody.
You know,
Mr. Hughes?
as we said before, we're looking at a president who has essentially continued the George Bush record in terms of war. We've had growth at 2%. We have black people and white people at each other's throats in this country, as one of the other people mentioned earlier. This is a failed presidency. We need to have somebody new and somebody who's going to take us in different directions. The Affordable Care Act is just coming into a huge disaster. It will be bankrupt in the end of a year. Do you know what's going to happen this year? All the people, all the poor people who did not sign up for Obamacare as they were required to, they're going to be fined $1,000 each. You know how those fines are going to be collected? people, poor people, get their tax refunds. They rely on those tax refunds to pay their bills. And those tax refunds are going to be confiscated by the IRS. It's going to be a complete disaster.
We're going to be moving on soon to our closing statements. Everybody will have a minute for a closing statement, but we'll take one last question from John. You can start with Mr. O'Donnell with that question.
Mr. O'Donnell, let's say you made it to the main stage. You won the New Hampshire primary. You're now a national candidate, and you're on the main stage with Bernie on your left and Hillary on your right. And you do something that we do here in our local debates. We have candidates ask each other questions as an attempt to try to differentiate themselves. What question would you ask Hillary, and what question would you ask Bernie?
Well, I'll be honest with you. I'm in favor of every elected official in the United States leaving public office now. I think we have to start the whole government over again. And I'm proposing a constitutional convention in Williamsburg, Virginia, 100 citizens, 2 from each state, and not all college professors, but milkmen, garbage men, maids, and start the whole government over again. It does not work. So I don't even want to acknowledge the existence of this current crop. I think they need to get out, all of them.
Okay. Sir?
I would like to basically make a comment on that. First and foremost, we happen to have a master chess player behind us. When you play chess, you have to look 6, 7 moves ahead to become a champion. Well, we need to look forward. Even though he might be in the major stage if he wins New Hampshire, you have to qualify in each individual state. The rules are prohibitive. The rules in Alabama, which was the first state, Arkansas, the second state, every state is very complex. It's besides, I believe, Michael, that has qualified in 5 states, it's very difficult to qualify in these states. So the question is, the chances of anybody making it through this pack, even if they happen to be sitting next to Hillary, is none. Mathematically, it's not possible because you have to be on the ballots. People have to have the right to vote for you. And I believe I have done the basically base thing. At least let's give the people the option to at least strike my name or say my name or have me as an alternative.
Mr. Stewart?
This is very important. I would ask Bernie Sanders, and I've asked his supporters who are socialists, why can't you be content with socialism in your own enclave? 100,000 Burlingtoners, for example, who want to do retirement their way, labor relations their way, education their way. I, as a libertarian, have no qualms with that. And 100,000 people can fund very economically every one of their systems. It's when they try to foist it on everybody else, it's off the rails, and it will never pass. A liberty-minded person, I am one, Rand Paul's on the other side, would allow it. I'm the socialist best friend. Even though I think they're wayward, I would let them try it. And let's see if their enclave is indeed happier, more prosperous than a more liberty-minded enclave or a more devout-minded, for religious persons, enclave out there. Let liberty allow socialists who don't foist it on others to try it and see.
Mr. Elbert, and then we'll get into our closing statements.
If I sat between Bernie and Hillary, one, Hillary is by far the most competent candidate on either side and either party within the existing paradigm. But in this unique election, we have this guy called Bernie Sanders, who is quite a unique figure, who in the past could never get within striking distance of the White House. And I believe if anybody really wants change, he is the candidate that can operate outside of the existing paradigm, introduce innovative ideas, and operate from a deep compassion that I believe he has, and I believe this country needs, both to heal as well as to find a new vigor and a new sense of the destiny of this country. So because of his unique role in this campaign and his unique status, anybody who has supported me and any person that I have managed to convince to be interested in me, I would like to throw my support behind Bernie Sanders in this campaign.
Okay, thank you all for participating in this debate tonight. We are more or less on time, but in order to make sure we get everybody to have a 1-minute closing statement, we'll cut off the questions there. We'll begin our closing arguments to the voters of New Hampshire with Mr. Weil.
Thank you. I'd like to thank Bill Gardner for the way he runs the Secretary of State's office and making each one of us feel like we belong here in New Hampshire. I think it's very important that this nation understand that the reason we are where we are is that our Congress decided that we would make a massive transfer of wealth to the wealthy. That when we cut taxes from 70% down to 30%, we gutted our treasury and we gutted our ability to educate, feed, and give health care to all of our people. And until we decide, the people, to get together, register to vote, and go out and vote for people who will believe in them as people and not serve the wealthy who really do not need any help, then we're going to be in a world of hurt. We need to elect people who will fight for the people and not just for the wealthy.
Thank you. Mr. Steinberg.
You know, I'm the former chair of the Hillsborough County, Florida Democratic Executive Committee. I understand that Manchester's also Hillsborough County. The most important job you can do in politics is be a precinct committee man or woman. So you young people out here, join your local Democratic Executive Committee. Become a precinct man or become a precinct woman. It's very important that you get Democrats elected at the city council level, at the county commission level, the state representatives, state senators, because those are going to be your future leaders, your future presidents. Don't just get involved in the president election. Get involved in the local election, the state election, and get involved, become educated. Don't be ignorant. So my message to people out there who are listening, in 2000, Al Gore lost by 537 votes in Florida. If we had 537 more Democrats who were out there voting, Al Gore would have been president. So please go out there and get involved.
Thank you, Mr. Sonino.
You mentioned a litmus test for a Supreme Court justice, and for me, it would be to recognize that the death penalty is unconstitutional because it must be viewed as cruel and unusual punishment. Number two, we have many failing public schools, at least in New York, we've had them, and I'm sure in many other of the major cities. And having volunteered to teach a couple of courses in them, I realized what the problem was. One, there's no discipline imposed in the classroom. There's no institutional discipline. And practically no homework is assigned, and none is done. So, and a third point is that a lot of these failing students need individual tutoring and mentoring. So if we want to get rid of poverty, we have to make sure that we find the way to get every child well educated. And the last one is to greatly reduce recidivism in the prison, amongst criminals. We must have real rehabilitation programs, educational and psychological, in the prisons.
Thank you. Mr. Sloan.
Yeah, three things that I didn't get a chance to say because I didn't have enough time in the opening statement are, number one, we must reinstate the estate tax. There was an estate tax of 40%. That was abolished by George W. Bush. First thing you do is get rid of the estate tax to protect his billionaire friends. That's why we got all these billionaires, because their children and grandchildren don't have to pay any taxes like the Rockefellers. They lived for hundreds of years with the same money because they never had to pay estate tax. We got to bring back that estate tax so that even the children of rich people still have to work, because all these children of rich people aren't working now. Number two is I want everybody can have a driver's license if they know how to drive. This helps because a lot of people are driving without licenses because they can't get one because they're illegally here. But regardless of whether they're legally here, they should be allowed to have a driver's license if they can drive a car. And third thing is, basically everybody should be allowed. They should give all these illegal immigrants an ID and fingerprint them, so at least we know who they are. Because the problem is we say we have 11 million illegal immigrants, but we have no ideas. We have no ballpark figure how many are here. So at least we got to get some handle on how many people we got in this country.
Thank you, Mr. Sloan. Mr. Schwartz, you're next.
Yes, let me repeat on the environment, on saving the natural world. If we don't save the natural world, I don't believe we deserve to be here. I don't see how we can stand before God or whatever and claim to be moral. And let me conclude by saying, in this age of war and prejudice and divisiveness, I want to say something. I love Jesus, but I am not a Christian. I'm a Unitarian. I believe that Muhammad was a great prophet of God, but not the last. I believe Buddha was a great teacher, and I try to follow Buddha's practice, but we cannot wait. So we have the words God, Allah, Jehovah, Yahweh, people of the book, Buddha, Shiva, the sun and the moon, the earth and the sky. All are the same, all are one. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Schwartz. Mr. O'Donnell.
Yes, John Adams wrote to Thomas Jefferson, and he said, if there's no literal heaven, the entire Bible must be torn up. Jefferson wrote back and said, yes, John, the existence of a God of love presumes a literal place where family and friends will live together forever in happiness and healing. Love people, help people, you get into heaven. And God gave Peter a vision of heaven. Heaven's like a perfect day at the beach in the summer. It's like that fitness club at the Nashua Radisson, whirlpool, sauna, steam pool. So help people, love people, and focus on heaven.
Thank you, Mr. Morose.
I would say save the middle class, vote for Raymond. If you don't vote for Raymond Morose, vote for Bernie Sanders.
Thank you, Mr. Morose. Mr. McGoy, if you can make sure to have the microphone in front of you when you speak.
Well, this is going to be a very important election. I think my two favorite candidates are Bernie Sanders and Donald Trump, different parties in a practical sense. But part of the problem is that we can't really talk about things anymore. There's a politics of hate and despising each other, and criminalization, too many people in prison. I'm focusing on white people who are the majority population in America. Still, there's a legacy of shame which leads to debilitation. We really need to hold our leaders to a higher standard. Both our political and business leaders, we are being misled. And just to do anything to march, to stand up, to participate in an election is something. This could be a wonderful year. It could be a wonderful year if the right people are elected. And I'm proud to be part of the process, and thank you for inviting me and others to participate.
Mr. Levitt, you're next.
For those who think that ISIS is not a threat, be reminded that Hitler started off with a bunch of unemployed drunks in a Munich beer hall. And to think that bullets and bombs will fix the problem is not true. We are fighting the same theology, or a similar theology, that the kamikazes used to fly into American targets with the hope of just killing Americans, that they would go to heaven. What I want you to know is that we have a lot of problems, from drug abuse, from real unemployment, and that we need to deal with them in a logical manner and deal with them one piece at a time. I can work with Republicans. New Hampshire, send the nation a message and vote for Robert Levitt.
Thank you, Mr. Lipscomb. You're next.
Recently, New Hampshire lost one of its greats. Professor John Rossius at Dartmouth was an extraordinary representation of this state and grew up very near here. His memoir, The Unzipped Mind, is a great inspiration. Rather than read the amendment, which is what I was going to do in my closing statement, I'll just suggest that you go to fixedamerica.org, that you dare to unzip your mind in order to think that perhaps what we need to do is tinker with the system, something we can actually do. Go to our representatives, get them to sign up for something that truly changes the equation. When money and gerrymandering come out of the process and they're reasonably gone, we have a chance to get to the issues that all of these well-meaning and wonderful candidates in front of you have described tonight. Thank you, New Hampshire, so much for making this forum available to us all.
Thank you. And Mr. Kelso.
I want to thank the state of New Hampshire and for the panel for conducting this. This is really the first time that I've been able to get on television. And if you want to see more about Lloyd Kelso, go to www. Facebook likes. I was 4th among Democrats in Facebook social media following and should have been in the debates, in my opinion. Certainly had more than Lincoln Chafee or Jim Webb, and they both made the stage. I wrote letters to Debbie Wasserman Schultz. She wanted to make sure that I wasn't on the debate stage, I feel, because when it came to the other category in the polling, we had about 15%. I was probably about 2 or 3% of that 15%, but still didn't make the debate stage. I've been endorsed by the Democratic Liberty Caucus. I stand for trying to help with the ISIS situation, and I'm the only one, I believe, up here that really stands for your security and protecting America and Americans here, home and abroad. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Hutton, you're next.
Yes, I would like to thank everyone at St. Anselm for having us here this evening. You know, we hear all the time now that our children aren't going to have the same opportunities that those of us on the stage have had. It's more than just a shame. It's a disgrace. And it needs to be changed. We are the best nation, the greatest nation in the world, and we can change this outcome if we stop stealing from our children. That means we pay and balance the budget and pay for the governmental services we consume now. And we take steps to give our children a better opportunity through education. Specifically, I would support expanding aid to our community colleges. I went to a community college to give them the opportunity to have their dreams come true like we've had an opportunity. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Mr. Hughes, rounding third and heading for home.
Yeah, I'd like to speak directly to New Hampshire's Democratic voters. If you're not satisfied with Hillary Clinton and Bernie Sanders, you still have an opportunity to do something that's critically important in this primary election. The deaths of 58 million babies in the United States since 1973 are the predominant moral crime of our population. I am the pro-life candidate in this race. I'm endorsed by Democrats for Life and most prominent pro-life Democrats. Let the record show once again that there will be 3,500 innocent babies killed today, 25,000 this week, 100,000 this month. Our Constitution, our Declaration of Independence, our religious tradition, our humanity calls on all of us to do what we can to right this wrong. I stand with Martin Luther King, John Kennedy, Bobby Kennedy, and I believe a majority of Democrats. Please vote pro-life in this primary.
Thank you, Mr. Hughes. Mr. Stewart, you're next.
I'd like to get a show of hands from people in the audience. You get to vote. Please raise your hand if you think there are some things that you could do better than Congress. Brad, Jude, John, Mike, you can add to this. Seeing a good number of hands.
I'll put my hand up.
Excellent. You are disserved anytime you expand the powers of Congress. And that is what President Obama and most progressives want to do. It may be good meaning, it may be that they want more power because as government grows bigger, they get more power. Please don't listen to the leaders of my party who have feel-good things but don't do good. President Obama has been the worst president for blacks since James Buchanan, 1859. Black jobs matter. Black lives matter. Black education matters. Black babies matter. Many of them get aborted. We need a more responsible government, and citizens do that better.
Thank you, Mr. Stewart. Mr. French.
If Bernie Sanders is elected,
and the Congress is supportive, and the top tax rate goes to 90%. Our top business executives who make $1 million, for example, will be looking at having an after-tax income of $100,000 or so in the United States versus going to another country and having $500,000 of net income after their taxes. We'll have an outflow of executives. We'll have, if the tax rates on companies goes up, we'll have an outflow of companies, and this nation will become poor. On immigration, we need to keep the good ones, those who are hardworking, and get rid of the bad ones. In terms of online that I spoke about in my opening remarks, the college system of lectures has been around since the time of St. Anselm, and some of it is good, but it is old technology. Online is new technology, and we need to support it. It's very inexpensive, it can be worldwide, and we can gain a lot from it without having huge college loans.
Thank you, Mr.
Colleges
French.
need competition.
Mr. Elbert, you're next, and make sure you're speaking into the microphone.
Everyone at St. Anselm's, when you come visit me, you get to stay in the Lincoln bedroom. Actually, I'm not important in this at all. The ideas are what's important. And one idea that I'd like to express, because I like solving problems wholesale, is America needs a National Service Corps. I call it an innovation corps, that every American citizen gives to their country 2 or 3 years. And that will solve these problems about the white cop and the black people, about the immigrants. When we rub shoulders together, it's hard to hate each other. When the rich guy has to live in the same barracks as the guy who swam across the Rio Grande, they understand each other. So one of the things that I would advocate for on day one is a National Service Corps called the Innovation Corps that would use new technologies to solve actual problems in our towns, in our country, and even internationally. So the idea, I think, is I believe in deep democracy, and everybody participating in our country can contribute to solving the problems. That's what I represent. I'm not important.
Thank you, Mr. De La Fuente. You're next.
Yes, thank you very much. First and foremost, I want to look into how I got here. My second last name is Alexander. My grand-granddad came on the Mayflower. And where did they come from? From England, from UK. Where did my other grandfather came from? France. Where did the other one come from? Spain. Eventually they made it to Mexico. And eventually from Mexico we made it back here. So I started the revolution with Daniel Alexander, and I was born in San Diego. But what's so interesting is nobody talked here about the homeless. Nobody talked about the homeless. Well, guess what? I plan to reduce at least 50% of the homeless off the streets. Nobody talked about our parks. Nobody talked about our air, the air we breathe. Nobody talked about our environment. Nobody talked about what sports means to our kids, to our education. Nobody talking about jobs. I want to bring in, right now, I would have asked, what would I do the first day in office? I'm not going to wait for the day in the office. I'm going to start 100 days before that. And I want to generate 1 million new jobs, 32 million new jobs. Thank you.
And the last minute goes to John Adams.
Thank you, Mike. Well, thank you for mentioning the environment. I've been fighting for the environment for 20 years, starting in southwestern New Mexico in 1996, 98. But I'd also like to take a moment of silence for Glenn Fry of the Eagles. Now, my time is short. But I did want to take that moment. He died of rheumatoid arthritis and ulcerative colitis, and I just think it's abhorrent that we can spend more than $1 trillion going to war in Iraq, and we can't spend 10%, 5% of that researching diseases, trying to cure diseases. Why is there no cure for rheumatoid arthritis? Why is there no cure for ulcerative colitis? Why did Glenn Fry have to die? He didn't have to die. Why do we have a country that's not focused on things that really matter to people, focused on curing diseases, focused on advancing science, focused on making sure that our children have better opportunities than we did, making sure that the environment is safe and clean for them? Thank you for coming. Thank you, Secretary Gardner. God bless New Hampshire and the United States of America. Good night.
Let's get a round of applause for our Democratic candidates. Thank you all for sharing your views and putting yourself forward as candidates. If I can thank my panel mates here, Brad and John, thank you for your time, and to Jim Splain for keeping the time and doing a great job with it. And one final thank you to the audience watching here at St. Anselm and on C-SPAN as well. And thank you to the Institute of Politics and to the Secretary of State's office. Thank you. Have a good night.